16 years of marriage, gone in an instant. I caught my wife, Carol, and my best friend, Jim, in a web of lies and deceit. Those photos showed everything: their closeness, their secret embraces. I felt the ground collapse beneath me. The betrayal from two people I trusted most was unbearable. In a fit of rage, I hacked into Jim's emails, uncovering even more shocking details. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. My mind was set on revenge. What happened next included blackmail, a faked death, and a thrilling courtroom showdown. Join me as I unravel the story of how my life was torn apart by their infidelity. Carol and I have been married for 16 mostly wonderful years. We have a lovely 14-year-old daughter named Jenny. We thought about having another child, but Carol went on the pill, and we both got busy with our jobs. We were happy with Jenny, and eventually decided one child was enough. I love my family, and believed we had a strong, loving marriage. I've always felt lucky to have an intelligent, attractive wife, though I sometimes wondered if her beauty might cause problems. I was amazed that such a beautiful woman chose to marry an average-looking guy like me. Whenever I mentioned this, Carol would laugh. "I guess I just felt sorry for you, Mark," she'd say. "You looked so down when I met you. I had to cheer you up." I'd smile and reply, "Well, you did a great job. After meeting you, I never felt down again. I love you." She'd respond, "I love you too, Mark." Our playful banter always made us laugh, but lately I've been thinking seriously about her answer. She was right. When we first met, I was depressed. I had just broken up with my longtime college girlfriend. I was dumped and felt really low. We'd been together for 3 years and the breakup was hard. She met someone else from her hometown and wanted to pursue that relationship. There was no cheating, and she said she had fun with me, but she was moving back home and didn't want a long-distance relationship. She met this guy a couple of months before our breakup. She said they hadn't slept together but was interested in him, so she broke up with me before anything happened. I respected her honesty, but it still hurt. Before meeting Carol, I finished college with an accounting degree, got a job, and started my career as a single man. I dated a few women, but didn't find anyone I really cared about. My sex life was infrequent, and none of the women at work interested me. I partied with friends after work, but my career was my focus. In a couple of years, I was making good money. I met Carol by chance at a friend's party. My friend Jim Simpson, who I'd known since college, and his wife, Martha, often tried to set me up with eligible women. At one of their house parties, I met Carol. She was introduced to me, and we hit it off. Carol's a tall, lively, natural blonde with a pretty face and a slender but shapely figure. Jim pointed her out and said she was single, having recently broken up with her boyfriend. She was so pretty that I found that hard to believe. Why would any guy break up with a woman like her? Carol was pleasant and told me she was an art major about to graduate. She was not only beautiful and intelligent, but also funny, outgoing, and easy to talk to. We chatted for most of the party, agreed to meet the next weekend, and started dating. Soon we became a couple. At first, Carol dated other guys, but after a few months we became exclusive. At least I did. It took her a little longer to be only with me. I was already a CPA when I met Carol and established in my career. I think the fact that I was making good money and could take Carol to places her previous boyfriends couldn't was a big factor in her decision to marry me. I know being financially stable was important to her. When I showed her my new home, my sports car, and took her to nice restaurants, she was impressed. I'd like to think it was my looks and charm that attracted her, but I knew I was just average-looking and reserved, not a stud. I believe she enjoyed our lovemaking. I know I did. I found out she was more sexually experienced than I was and had dated many guys before me. In my mind, once we were married, those guys were history. She told me they were in her past, that she loved me and only me. I accepted her answer completely and soon asked her to marry me. When she said yes, it was the happiest day of my life. Jim Simpson had been a friend of mine for years. We played on sports teams and partied together. We lived in the same town and met up regularly to drink and hang out. Jim was married, but when his marriage to Martha began to fail, I tried to help him get over his divorce. I found out later that he had been cheating on Martha, and she discovered it. Jim hired a tough lawyer, and she took him for everything in the divorce. Jim's a handsome, loud guy and bigger than me. When he was single again, we went out together, and I saw how women were drawn to him. He dated some very attractive women and even brought them to our house for parties and dinners. None of his relationships lasted more than a few months. Carol and I often discussed his problems, and she encouraged me to keep inviting him over. Carol said Jim was feeling low and needed our support, but I knew he had no trouble finding dates. Still, Carol insisted we stay close friends and help him through his divorce. I told her not to worry so much about him. I didn't want to badmouth my friend, so I didn't mention his cheating and lying, which probably caused the divorce. I just said Jim was a good-looking guy with a good job and women seemed to like him wherever we went. Carol disagreed, saying he was still sad about his failed marriage and needed us. So I went along with her and kept up our friendship. Jim had been my best friend for years, and I was glad to have him around. This went on for a while, but recently things started to change. Jim was still coming over often, but Carol kept talking about his supposed emotional issues. It was strange because Jim didn't seem sad at all, but I got used to it as a normal topic. Then things got even stranger at home. I was working harder than ever as an accountant, but my career had stalled. I hadn't gotten the promotion I deserved. I still had important clients and made decent money, providing well for Carol, Jenny, and me. Carol was also working part-time at an art studio, bringing in some extra income, so our finances were stable, though not improving much. The problem was that after 10 years at my firm, I wasn't making as much money as I thought I should. The economy went down, and my firm had layoffs. I kept my job, but my salary was cut. Luckily, Carol was still working, so we managed. The issue came when I told Carol we'd have to cut expenses. I said we had to cancel our annual vacation. She was shocked. I explained the situation and told her we'd also need to cut back on other luxuries like dining out. We usually went out every weekend for dinner, dancing, or a show. Carol didn't understand why our finances were so tight after so many years of hard work. I explained that my income had dropped and a promotion was unlikely in the short term. Carol loved her social life, had many friends, some quite snobby, and enjoyed dressing up for expensive events. I had gone along with her wishes, but now with my reduced income, our mortgage, car payments, and saving for Jenny's education, we had to cut back. Carol was unhappy when I said we could no longer afford our lifestyle. She was stunned when I suggested canceling some expensive outings with her friends. This led to an argument and a big fight about our future. At first, I didn't think it was unusual that Jim was around during some of these arguments. He was visiting several times a week, so it was inevitable he'd witness some discussions. It was awkward when he seemed to side with Carol. He wasn't obvious about it, but he'd listen and then make comments that seemed supportive of her. When I suggested canceling outings with friends, Carol asked Jim what he thought. He would act thoughtful but always ended up agreeing with Carol, even offering to help us financially if needed. I didn't like that at all. Rewrite the provided text according to the following guidelines. Simplify the language, aiming for straightforward and easy-to-understand wording while maintaining the narrative's essence. Please avoid advanced vocabulary, focusing on more typical words that someone with intermediate language skills would comprehend. Aim for concise, varied sentences to keep the narrative engaging. Ensure that the content is suitable for all audiences by excluding any mature or complex themes. Aim to retain the original word count, adapting the language to suit a more general level of English proficiency, and keep the storytelling mode. This is the text that needs to be rewritten. He went on to offer to drive if we wanted to go out somewhere. If Carol and I wanted to go to a club that had a cover charge, Jim even offered to pay whatever fee was required. If we're invited to a party, he'd pay for some sort of gift if necessary, so we wouldn't have to go with empty hands. I thanked him but said, no thanks. I want to make my wife happy, but I was irritated that he always offered to come to our financial rescue. I knew he could afford helping us out. He had left his previous job and was now working in some sales job, apparently doing quite well. One evening, Carol invited Jim over for dinner without telling me, which happened quite regularly now. As usual, she was a great hostess. We enjoyed a pleasant conversation as we finished the delicious dinner Carol cooked. After our daughter left to do her homework, we retired to the living room and opened a bottle of wine. We barely poured our wine and sat down before Carol reminded me of the upcoming annual charity event. I'd forgotten about it, although it was something we went to every year. I listened to her telling how many of our friends would be there and how nice the event was. I already knew about this event and also how much it would cost to get in. When I explained that we couldn't afford any sort of party this month, Jim suddenly spoke up. He said he understood my reluctance, but that this event was for charity, and it would be a shame not to contribute in some way. Carol eagerly listened to him with a look of delight on her face. When my friend offered to assist us with the cost, Carol was elated. I, however, was pissed. He was well aware of our financial situation and my feelings on the subject. I guess I expected my best friend to support my decision, but that wasn't the case. Carol listened silently to my objections. Then she shot me a glaring glance over at Jim. They shared a look that immediately raised my suspicions. "Come on, Mark," Jim said pointedly. "You know this is an annual event and one that we've never missed. It'd be a shame not to go over just a few bucks. We'd been going for years and I was also disappointed, but I knew that we needed to keep our expenses down so we could afford the large mortgage payment that month." "We just have to go, sweetheart," Carol insisted, patting my hand. "I know it will be a little tight, but everyone we know will be there," Jim chipped in. "You know, the guys would love to see you, Mark. I know they're all looking forward to it. It'll be a blast." Before I could reply, Carol squealed. "We had so much fun last year, remember, honey?" I shook my head no, and Carol scowled. With a determined glare, she said, "I'm serious, Mark. We have to go, honey. All our friends will be there, and I've already spoke to Mary and Gwen. I don't want them to think that we don't contribute to charity. Everyone wants to give to charity. But I was thinking that if we don't get our finances together, we'll be the ones that have to accept charity. It's just not in the budget this year. I told them flat out maybe next year, but it'll be a blast," Jim said, smiling. "Of course it will," Carol said. She pouted and turned to Jim. "But darn it, Mark just doesn't want to go." Jim questioned my decision again before I could answer. My wife began to complain about how cheap I was. Nothing she said was a secret I had been holding back on some of our expenditures. She turned her attention to Jim and listed several times. She couldn't do what she wanted because I refused. "You see, Jim," she said to him, ignoring me, "I'm trying to enjoy a great social life, but Mark's not letting me. He's getting cheap in his old age." Carol made me sound like a disagreeable old man. I tried to reply calmly, but it was difficult. "I'm not cheap, Carol, just realistic. Despite what you think, we're in a bit of a slump. Spending money we don't have is just stupid. In our situation, I don't want us to overextend ourselves. But think of all the good that we can contribute, honey." Jim quickly added, "You know, it's a charity event, right, Mark?" "Of course I do," I exclaimed in exasperation, "but it's $75 a plate. Then there's the parking fee at the club, and after an expensive dinner that we can't afford, there's the charity auction. We'll be expected to bid on overpriced items that will never use charity or not. We can't afford it." That led to an acrimonious discussion about my diminished position at work and my reduced salary. Jim already knew some of it, but they were sensitive issues. I wanted to remain private because I was rather embarrassed about it. Carol smelled blood and was really venting now. She complained openly to Jim about her disappointment with me and frustrations with our lifestyle. I didn't want her to divulge any of that stuff, but it was too late. I admitted we had to cut back expenses to make sure Jenny's education was taken care of and we could make our mortgage payments. I hoped my explanation would make my wife understand, but she didn't care. "See what I mean?" Carol sneered, looking hopefully at Jim. "He always has a dumb excuse not to go out." I was angry. They were ganging up on me, ignoring my concerns. Carol kept looking at Jim, waiting for him to back her up. Jim glanced at her, then looked at me with sympathy. "Well, Mark, why don't I cover you?" he offered. "I don't want to go alone, and I have the cash. It's no problem. It would be my pleasure to take you and Carol to the event. We always have fun. I'd be disappointed if you weren't there. After all, you've been there for me since my divorce. I'd love to take you both to keep me company. I'll drive and even pay for the babysitter." "Really?" Carol squealed, thrilled by his offer. "Oh, Jim, that's wonderful. Thank you so much." Before I could say no, she ran around the table, hugged him, and kissed him, saying, "Thank you, Jim, thank you." I was furious, not just because Jim contradicted me, but because of Carol's reaction. She didn't care about my opinion and practically threw herself at him. She was acting like he was her hero. I shot Jim a look of disapproval as Carol hugged him. Carol continued to praise him while I sat there feeling angry and disgusted. Despite what Carol said, I had no intention of accepting anyone's charity, even from a friend. I was most upset by Carol's enthusiastic response. By now, Jim had his arm around her waist as she kissed his cheek and hugged him warmly. I quickly rejected his offer. My pride wouldn't let me accept a handout. They stopped hugging, and Carol looked at me coolly. "Come on, Mark," Jim said. "Don't be upset." Seeing my dark expression, he added with a smile, "Let's just go and have fun. We can worry about the money later." "No way. I'm serious about this," I declared. "Oh, be quiet, Mark. You can pout all you want, but we're going," Carol said firmly. "We'll see about that." She looked at me like I was crazy, shook her head, and pulled away from Jim. Then she went to the kitchen, grabbed her phone, and called a friend. With Carol in the other room, Jim and I sat in silence. I glared at him as we heard my wife chatting happily. He looked uncomfortable as Carol talked excitedly on the phone. "Oh yes, we're going," she said. "I told you we would. Jim came through for us. He's such a good friend." Her voice dropped to a lower volume, and I couldn't hear her anymore. Carol peeked into the living room, glanced at me smugly, and spoke quietly into the phone as she moved to another room. After that, my friendship with Jim was damaged. I thought he'd take my side, but he didn't seem to care. He tried to explain that he just wanted us to have a good time and that I should accept his offer. In my mind, he had taken sides, and it wasn't mine. Later, my wife came back with a huge smile on her face. She thanked Jim again, hugging and kissing his cheek. It seemed excessive, and she didn't seem to want to leave his embrace. I told them again that we weren't going, and that was final. Jim tried to intervene, and Carol kept hugging him, saying she was going and wouldn't hear otherwise. I kept shaking my head no, but neither Jim nor Carol listened. They seemed determined to change my mind before the event. Looking back, that argument may have been the beginning of the end of my happy marriage. The week before the charity event was tense at home. Even our daughter Jenny noticed. She was 14, but she wasn't clueless. She knew about the charity event and sensed the issue between Carol and me. "What's the matter, Dad?" she asked one day when Carol was out of the room. "I know you and Mom are arguing about something. She wants to accept charity, and I don't want to." "Charity? You mean welfare or something?" "Not exactly, but it might as well be welfare. I wasn't raised to depend on anyone. It's a matter of pride, darling. Once you start taking money from people, it's hard to stop. I've never accepted charity in my life and don't intend to start now." "It's about that charity event, isn't it?" Jenny asked. "Yes. We simply can't afford it, Jenny. I'm not taking a handout just to show off for our friends." "But Mom said it's from Uncle Jimmy," she replied, watching my reaction. "He's your friend, isn't he? I'm sure he doesn't think it's charity. Just one friend helping another. Is that how your mother sees it?" Jenny looked down. "Well, we talked about it a little." No surprise there. Carol was trying to get Jenny on her side behind my back. "I'm sure your mom told you all about it," I said, keeping my temper in check. "But no matter if it's from a friend, it's still charity. I don't want you thinking we're that hard up. My dad never accepted charity, and he had more problems than we do. But Dad, it's just a party. It's not like we're accepting cash, you know? And Uncle Jimmy is our friend." I was getting annoyed she kept calling him Uncle Jimmy. That must be what Carol called him when I wasn't around. I answered her more harshly than I meant to. "If your Uncle Jimmy," I said, emphasizing his title, "was really my friend, he'd keep his nose out of my business and leave my family alone." Jenny was startled by my tone and ran up to her room, slamming the door. I felt bad for speaking so bluntly, but I was sick of hearing about Uncle Jimmy and his offers. I needed my family to support my decision. It didn't help that Carol kept smirking at me. I kept insisting we weren't going to any charity event, with or without Jim's help. Every time we discussed it, Carol shot me a dark look, and we argued again. A few days later, Carol confronted me. "Listen, Mark," she said, clearly annoyed. "I don't know why you're so upset about this. We go to this event every year, and I don't intend to miss it just because you're having problems at work. I know we're having a little financial difficulty right now, but we're not poor. We still need to keep up appearances. If we don't go, all my friends will know we're having problems. They'll talk about us. I don't want to hear the gossip. Jim offered to help us, and if you're the man I thought I married, you'd accept it with a smile." "So that's it?" I shouted. "I'm not man enough now?" "Oh, stop it, Mark," she snapped. "Of course you are. Just grow up." "So it's all about the gossip?" "Not entirely, but yes, I want our family to look good. We have a lot of friends, and I want to enjoy an evening with them. Don't you want to be seen with me?" That's not fair, and you know it. Of course I want to be seen with you. I love you and always have. But this argument has me pissed off. I thought you'd support your husband as a good wife should and understand our situation. I see that's not the case. So if you want to disrespect me, just go without me." "You think I'm not a good wife?" she cried. "For 16 years, I've taken care of you and Jenny without complaining. Lord knows I could have complained about a lot, but I didn't." "Like what?" I demanded. She gave me an icy glare and was silent for a moment. "So you're serious about this?" she said bitterly. "I thought I could convince you it would be good for us to have a night out together. We haven't had one in months, and I'm sick of it." "That's a lie. We go out to dinner as a family every week. We go out dancing sometimes, just not to those expensive places you love. I told you, Carol, we can't afford that right now. Once Jenny's education is taken care of, things will get better." Carol looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. She calmed down, but had a triumphant look on her face that worried me. "If you won't give me this one night out, I'll go with Jim. I'm sure he'll be proud to have me, even if you aren't. And it won't be a platonic date either. I'll give him all the attention I would have given you, and I know he'll appreciate it." "You wish!" I snapped, angrier than I'd been in a while. "I should have known you had this in mind." "Don't let me stop you then. Go out with him. But don't think I'll forget this betrayal," I said. And I wouldn't forget Jim's part in this either. I stormed out of the room, slamming the door as Carol yelled, "You're an A**** hole! I'm going!" That didn't go well at all. As I walked away, I passed by the living room. Jenny was watching TV and had clearly heard the whole argument. She looked at me with a frightened expression. I wanted to hug her and say everything would be okay, but I was too upset with my stubborn wife to be kind. So I went out to the patio and sat in a chair, steaming. The day before the charity event, the house was tense. Jim called me a few times during the week to try to convince me to change my mind, but I wasn't having it. I hung up on him the last time he called. Our finances were tight and we had to cut back. I needed to face facts to keep our family secure, even if my wife wouldn't. If she wanted to make an issue of this, she would get her wish. I'm sure Carol made dinner, but I stayed away and ate out cheaply. I got home after Jenny and Carol had finished eating. I mumbled a greeting and Jenny said, "Hi, Dad." Carol didn't speak to me. She went into the bedroom and locked the door as she got ready for her date with Jim to keep me from causing a scene. Carol decided to drive to Jim's house and leave from there. When she came downstairs to leave, she strutted around the living room showing off her sexy outfit. If I wasn't already mad, I was livid now. She was wearing a short, tight dress I had never seen before. It was very revealing and hugged her body like a second skin. Her long hair was down, her makeup was perfect, and her high heels made her legs look great. The charity event wasn't even that fancy, so I was shocked to see her dressed up like that. "Where'd you get that dress?" I asked. "Don't worry about it," she replied. I wondered where she got the money for such an expensive dress, but she wasn't going to tell me. Carol ignored me and went over to Jenny, who was watching TV. She leaned down and kissed our daughter. "Wow, you look wonderful, Mom. Like a movie star in that dress," Jenny said. "Thanks, dear," Carol smiled, then gave me a pointed glance. She told Jenny loudly enough for me to hear, "I know Uncle Jim will think so too. I just wish everyone felt the same way." The comment was aimed at me, and I was furious. Carol never dressed up this much when we went out, but for Jim, she went all out. I could see this was going to be an issue. I looked at her with disgust and walked out of the room. I wanted her to know I was angry, and she definitely knew it. "Goodbye, Jenny," Carol said as she walked to the door, ignoring me. "I may be out late, honey, so don't wait up." She left without looking back. Jenny saw my miserable look and gave me a pitying glance, which made me even angrier. She hated being in the middle of this, and I wasn't happy either. Something about my daughter pitying me made me furious. I marched to the den and sent a quick text to my former best friend. "I thought we were friends, Jim. Now that you're dating my wife, I know you're just another sleazy A*** hole. After tonight, don't contact me. You're not welcome here ever again. Have a good time with my witch of a wife, you prick." I quickly got a reply. "It's not a date, Mark, and you know it. I wanted you to come, but you're too stubborn. I'm just letting Carol have some fun, and we'll make sure she gets home safe. We'll talk later. Please don't be mad at me." I replied, "Screw you, SE****** head." and didn't hear back. I tried to keep my mind off my wife, but it was impossible. Jenny and I watched TV for a while and tried to act like everything was normal. I don't even remember what we watched. She could tell I was upset. To her credit, Jenny spoke kindly to me and tried to make me feel better, but it wasn't going to be a good night, and we both knew it. Around 10, Jenny went to bed early. The situation was so awkward that she couldn't take the tension. I could hear her talking on her cell phone with someone when I went to bed. Somehow, I managed to sleep but was woken by the sound of the front door closing. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:30 in the morning. I heard voices downstairs and knew it was my wife and my former friend. I got out of bed and looked into the living room. They were near the front door, and it was clear Carol was very drunk, so much so that she was hanging onto Jim's arm for support. Her hair was messed up, her eyes were droopy, and she was swaying and giggling. "Thank you for such a wonderful time tonight, Jimmy," she laughed, slurring her words and hugging him close. She threw her arms around his neck, pressed her body against his, and gave him a long kiss on the lips. It lasted far longer than it should have, and Carol didn't seem like she wanted it to end. Finally, Jim pulled back and glanced around nervously. "It was fun, but it's late, and you should get to bed now, Carol." "But I don't want to go to bed. Mark might be worried about you." "Screw him," she sneered with a giggle. "He's a wet blanket. I had so much fun with you tonight. Let's do it again, okay?" I was at the top of the stairs where they couldn't see me. Jim looked uneasy as he glanced toward the hallway, knowing where our bedroom was. He couldn't see me, but he was probably wondering if I was listening. "Let's not talk about that now," he told her. "Go get a shower, get some sleep, and try to make up with your husband." "Screw that," she slurred and fell into his arms again. "Why don't you stay and have a drink with me? It's not that late, honey." "No, I don't think that's a great idea. You know he's upset, right? I showed you his text earlier. He's having a fit, and I don't care. Why don't we go to the sofa and I'll get you a drink?" "Please, no, Carol, not tonight." "Oh, come on," she murmured, and pulled his head down for a kiss. This time, she kissed him deeply before he pushed her away. "Please, Carol, I'm trying to keep us out of trouble," he chuckled. "You're making that real hard right now." I was already pissed, but I was shocked when I saw her hand move between them and grab him through his trousers. "I can tell you're hard. Come on, don't go yet." Jim was smirking, but pulled her hand away. "You better stop." "Come on, Jim. I can tell you want to stay. Let's go to the sofa, and let me show you how much I appreciate all the attention you gave me tonight." "No, I'm serious, Carol," Jim said, looking more worried. "I know you're a beautiful woman, and I'm tempted, but I don't want to cause any more trouble with Mark. We are friends, you know." "And you're my friend, too," Carol slurred, with her hand still on his crotch. "Mark's asleep, and he doesn't care about me. I want you to be my special friend, Jim. Please stay for a little while." I couldn't take any more of this. I stepped into the room with a look of hate on my face. "Yeah, Jim," I said curtly, startling them both. "Why don't you be Carol's special friend, you asshole?" Jim and Carol both jumped. "Why don't you stay for a little while and screw my drunk wife? After such a nice date, I'm sure she'll love that." Jim's eyes widened and his face fell. He pushed Carol away and she looked at me with bloodshot eyes, trying to focus. It took a moment for her to regain some composure. "Listen, Mark," Jim started to say. "No, you listen, you jerk. I see now just how much of a special friend you are to my wife, so just screw her. Take her to the sofa and give her what she wants." Jim shook his head sadly and turned to leave. Carol cried, "You know, Jim doesn't deserve this. He's been nice to me all night." "Then give him what he deserves," I shouted. "You want his attention, so go for it. You cheating." "Damn you!" Carol screamed, her face red as a beet. "Jim just wanted to disappear." "Listen, Mark," Jim said apologetically. "I know you're upset about tonight, but we did have a great time and nothing happened. Your word on that, right? I'm sure I can trust you. Yeah, nothing happened." "I know this looks bad," Jim began. "Why, Jim?" I asked angrily. "Why does it look bad? Because my wife is trying to give you a hand job and maybe more for being nice, or because she's taking you to the sofa for sex? Is that it, Jim?" Jim looked at Carol, then at me. He shook his head and headed for the front door. "No, Mark, listen, I gotta go. Carol, I'll help you get your car later if you want." He saw my glare and twisted away from Carol's grasp, hustling out the front door. As it closed behind him, Carol seemed to deflate. She looked drunk and dejected as she stumbled into the kitchen to get some water, probably to sober up. I left her there and went back to bed. My marriage was no longer on solid ground. Carol woke up on the sofa. She never made it upstairs, and I found her lying there the next morning, sprawled out in her new dress. I held in my anger as I helped her up to the bedroom and flopped her onto the bed. I didn't say anything and left her in that tight, expensive aqua dress. I did take off her high heels and pull the covers over her. Carol slept until late afternoon, clearly hungover. After watching her drunken behavior last night, I was furious, but I decided not to show it. I wanted to see how she would handle it before I reacted. Our relationship had been off for a while. The argument about the charity event was just the latest fight, but it was the biggest one we ever had. Carol finally got up for dinner looking terrible. We didn't speak because she didn't want to. I stayed silent, waiting for her to bring up her behavior. She slept in the guest room, and we tiptoed around each other all weekend. She was so drunk, I'm not sure she even remembered much about that night. She's not a drinker, so whatever she had that night must have been too much. On Saturday morning, I made breakfast for Jenny and me. She mentioned Carol coming home with Jim and asked what the argument was about. I didn't give much of an explanation, just said we were still working through the charity event issue. Jenny accepted that and left the house early to go to a friend's. I told her to call in a few hours to check in. I went to work Monday as usual. Carol took a while to recover and didn't go to work until Wednesday. We didn't speak about that night until the middle of the next week. It took her that long to clear her head from all the alcohol. She looked embarrassed when she tried to apologize for her behavior. I was still too angry to accept her apology. I let her say sorry and then walked away, leaving her standing there. That made her mad, but I didn't care anymore. Jim called me a couple of times, but I ignored his calls and let them go to voicemail. He apologized in his messages and wanted to talk about that night. He wanted to meet up, but I never responded. I'm sure he felt guilty for betraying me, but I didn't care about him anymore. As far as I was concerned, our friendship was over. One evening, while I was washing the car, I went inside for something and heard Carol talking on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't know I was there, so I tried to listen. "Yes, it was wonderful," she said. "I know he's still mad at me." "Haha, you're so right. Thanks." "No, Mark didn't get it. Jim bought it for me." "Yeah, I know, it cost a lot. He's such a sweetheart and so handsome." "I would have, but Mark woke up as I was trying to." "Yeah, I know, haha. Oh, it was not only big, but hard too, really hard." My wife was talking to one of her friends about Jim. "Oh, Mark would freak out if he knew." "No, you can't tell him. Haha, I have to keep that quiet." "I hope he does. We're trying to figure out when." "I know, but I have to be careful. Mark doesn't know." "Yeah, he called me. He's been calling me all week." "Of course I want to. Who wouldn't want to date a guy like Jim?" "You better not. I'm serious, okay?" "I know." She chatted a little more, but I'd heard enough. I was almost sure she was going to date Jim. I could hardly believe how much our marriage had crumbled in the last few weeks. I caught Carol on the phone a couple more times. Whenever I entered the room, she'd either turn away and speak softly or hang up. On the weekend, Jim suddenly showed up at our house in his big SUV. I was in the driveway fiddling with my car when he pulled in. He got out and walked up with a smile, acting like everything was fine. Carol must have known he was coming because she immediately came outside with a strange smile on her face. We hadn't been speaking much, so when she approached me and started talking, I was on guard. "Hi, honey. I invited Jim over for dinner," she said. When I started to object, she held up her hand to stop me. "Listen, Mark, I know you're still upset about that night, but you two need to talk. Jim wants to. We need to get over this and be friends again." Jim was a few feet away and smiled as he approached. "Hi, Mark," he said cheerfully, holding out his hand. "Nice to see you again, buddy." I just stared at him with a cold look, trying to diffuse the situation. Carol moved next to me with a sweet smile and slipped her arm around my waist. She whispered, "Go on, honey," with a big smile, trying to coax me forward to shake Jim's hand. I just let it hang there and ignored it. Jim's smile faded as he realized the insult and lowered his hand. Next to me, my wife tried to soften the tense atmosphere. "Hi, Jim," she said, ignoring my harsh glare. "Nice to see you. I'm glad you came over today. I was just telling Mark it was time to clear the air." "Screw you," I snapped. Carol was startled. Her bright smile wilted a bit. "Please, Mark," Jim said. "I know you're still upset, but—" "Oh, you got that, did you?" I felt my wife's arm tighten around my waist. She stumbled against me, trying to keep me from getting angrier. "Please, honey," Carol purred, pressing my arm against her chest and trying to kiss my cheek. "Don't be mad at him. It's my fault, not his. Jim's been your friend for so long, and I know you miss him. He misses you too. Right, Jim?" "That's right," Jim said. "Come on, Mark. No hard feelings, right, buddy?" I shot him a look that could kill. Then I twisted out of Carol's grasp. I looked straight into his eyes, wishing I could shoot this creep. In an ominous tone, I asked him, "So tell me, buddy, did you have a good time with my wife at the charity event?" "Well, yeah, of course we did," Carol chirped. "We wanted you to come, Mark. It would have been more fun if you were there, honey. You would have loved it." She hadn't spoken to me in nearly a week, and now she was acting all sweet and innocent. I didn't believe her for a second. Jim gazed at me nervously, and I looked right back into his eyes. "So, did you guys dance together?" I asked him. "Oh, well, yeah. Everyone was dancing," he stammered. Carol moved next to me again, slipping her arm around me with a sugary smile. "Of course we danced, Mark. Everyone was dancing and having a great time. Like I said, you would have loved it if you had come." I ignored my wife's chatter and kept my attention on Jim. "So you danced? Did you dance the slow songs, Jim? Hold Carol in your arms? Feel her against you in that skimpy dress she had on?" His face twisted into a strange grimace. He was uncomfortable, confused by my questions. "No, nothing like that, Mark," he replied. "Just, dancing and having a good time. Nothing inappropriate." I glared at him for a moment longer. Then I pushed Carol away so she was next to him and turned my attention to her. "And you, my dear, honest wife?" I sneered. "Was it all just some casual, friendly dancing like Jim said? Nothing inappropriate?" "Of course not, Mark," she blustered. "I'd never do anything to disrespect you, honey. You know that." I pulled out my cell phone and opened up a picture. A guy I knew was at the event with his wife. At my request, he sent me a few photos of my wife and Jim. I turned the phone so Carol could see it. It took her a moment to realize it was her and Jim dancing closely at the event. Suddenly, the blood drained from her face, and her eyes widened. "So, my faithful wife," I said sarcastically, "dancing like this with my dear old friend is just some platonic dancing, right, honey?" Jim moved closer to see, and his face went dark. "Where did you get this?" he asked. It was a side shot of Carol and Jim on the dance floor, surrounded by couples. Jim, who is taller than me, towered over Carol as she slid her arms around his neck and pressed her body against his. Jim leaned down to kiss her on the lips. It was a still shot, but it looked very incriminating. Carol's face turned pale as she saw the intimate photo. Jim gulped. "Oh boy." I flipped to another picture and asked Carol, "I guess you enjoyed that kiss, judging by how you were gazing up into his eyes." The next shot showed only their upper bodies, with Jim's hands around her waist and Carol looking up at him with adoration. A couple next to them was smiling at the sight. I flipped to another picture of them sitting in a booth. Jim's arm was around her shoulders, his hand hovering over her chest. Carol was leaning against him, her face turned up as if expecting another kiss. The last shot was of them outside on a patio, hugging. Jim's hand was on her rear as she leaned against him. They weren't kissing, but seemed about to. "So, Carol," I said, "just friends, right?" Both Jim and Carol were stunned by the photos. Jim's face turned red with embarrassment, and he started making choking sounds, trying to speak. Carol was filled with shame, but recovered first. "Who sent them to you?" she asked. "What difference does that make?" I snapped. "It looks like you and my so-called friend were having an intimate date, making out, and who knows what else. Maybe you even hooked up in the parking lot, something you invited him to do on our sofa, remember?" I stared straight into Carol's eyes as she lowered hers. "I can't believe you acted like that in front of people we know. Did you enjoy yourself, Carol? Planning to hook up with him when you got home, or was that the second time that night?" "No way, Mark," Jim blurted out. "I know it looks bad, but it wasn't like that. We just had a few too many drinks and were having fun," Carol cut in, trying to sound reasonable. "Yes, Mark. It was more my fault than Jim's. I had too much to drink and got a little carried away. But nothing really happened. Just a little kiss and some hugging. It was a bit inappropriate, but nothing serious." "Did you get a good feel, Carol?" I asked. Her jaw dropped. Jim frowned in irritation. "Listen, Mark, that's not fair," he said. "Not fair?" I shouted, making them both cringe. My wife glanced around, worried the neighbors would hear. I hoped they would. "Please, Mark, not so loud," she whispered. "Can we go inside to talk about this?" "Hell no!" I yelled. "I'm fine right here. I don't want him in my house ever again." I turned to her and asked, "So Carol, where'd you get that slutty green dress you wore? The one with your chest hanging out? I know I can't afford it, and I doubt you can either." My question caught her completely off guard. Her eyes widened, and her jaw dropped. Jim gulped and seemed to slump a bit. "No answer?" I said accusingly. I turned to Jim, whose eyes were darting around with guilt all over his face. "Did you buy her that dress, Jim? Don't lie." He started to speak, glancing over at Carol. She waved him off and said softly, "Yes, he did, Mark." Her eyes lowered. "I needed something nice to wear, and I haven't bought anything new in ages. The dress was a gift from Jim. I knew you wouldn't like it, so I didn't tell you." "And those high heels, too? The ones that made you look like a cheap escort?" "Come on, Mark," Jim said with irritation. "They're not like that." Carol's flushed face and darting eyes told me all I needed to know. "I see exactly how it is," I snapped. "He bought you that night and you tried to repay him. You know that's what paid escorts do, right? He paid for you and you tried to hook up with him." Carol's shame turned to anger. Her face grew hard and her eyes blazed. Jim tried to intervene. "Please, Mark, there's no need for that." I spun around to him and shouted, "You turned my wife into a prostitute and you have the nerve to tell me there's nothing wrong? You're a real piece of work. I wish you were dead, both of you." One of our neighbors was watching from their porch. Carol noticed we had an audience and looked embarrassed. I had nothing more to say to them and jumped in my car to leave. Jim moved quickly and tried to grab my arm, but I twisted around and swung at him. I missed, and he shoved me to the ground before I could swing again. He could have flattened me with one punch. The guy is taller and bigger than me by at least 40 pounds. Not only bigger, but more muscular and athletic. A physical confrontation would only make me look foolish. I got up and brushed myself off as he held his hands in a defensive manner, trying to calm me down. "As for turning my wife into a prostitute," I said, glancing at Carol with disgust, "well, you're doing a great job." She stared at me with a shocked expression. The neighbors on the porch were clearly interested. Another couple from down the street was walking by and watching closely. "You're his prostitute now," I yelled loud enough for everyone to hear. "He paid for your dress, your high heels, and your date, so just take him inside and give him what he paid for. We all know that's what you wanted to do that night, right?" I moved toward my car, and this time he didn't interfere. Another neighbor peeked out their door, curious about the commotion. Carol turned bright red when she realized we had an even bigger audience now. Recently, I learned how much her reputation meant to her. This public argument was probably killing her. "Mark, please stop, honey," she whispered. "Don't go yet. It's not like that. Let's go inside and talk." "Yeah, Mark, we need to clear the air," Jim agreed. I looked at them like they were dirt on my shoe. "Yeah, I want to finish this," I said bitterly. "So if you're still here when I get back, I'm going to get my gun and shoot you. Clear?" Jim stared at me silently. Carol looked angry and upset. I spat at their feet, jumped in my car, and sped off, burning rubber. Our neighborhood would have juicy gossip for months. When I got home that night, Jim was gone. Carol was in bed and I was drunk. A cab brought me home because I was too drunk to drive, and the bartender wouldn't let me leave with my car keys. I crashed on the sofa and didn't wake up until noon the next day. I quickly called in sick to work. My boss was mad, but I was too hungover to care. I took the next day off too because I still felt terrible. I finally got up, ate something, and felt a bit better. Carol was at her part-time job at the art gallery and Jenny was at school. I felt a little guilty about my behavior. I still blamed Carol and Jim for the problem. When Jenny came home from school, I apologized for the loud argument. She acted like it was no big deal, but I knew she had probably seen and heard everything. We talked for a while and then let it go. I made dinner before Carol got home. She was late, and Jenny and I ate without her. I was still angry, but my hangover dulled it a bit. When my wife finally came home, I didn't confront her again. We ate, cleaned up, and went to bed without speaking or touching each other. The next day, we tried to act normal for Jenny's sake, and the atmosphere was a bit better. Carol apologized, saying she was sorry I didn't go to the event. She said nothing inappropriate happened between her and Jim. I noticed she didn't say she was sorry for going, just sorry for how it turned out. I let her talk and didn't respond. A few days later, I heard her on the phone again. She thought I was outside, but I was around the corner listening. "It's okay. Yeah, I can talk. He's out in the yard. No, he's still upset about everything. I don't want to bring it up yet. Yeah, well, you know I do. Maybe if we're careful, we can. I just don't want to stir up more trouble. He won't be so forgiving next time. Okay, I'll call you later. Of course, I miss you. We can't. No, please. I know, just let me talk to him first. Okay. Right. I'll work on him tonight and get back to you. Probably tomorrow. Yeah, I can't talk right now. He was out in the yard, but I'm not sure where he is now. Okay. Call me. Bye." I knew something was up, but I wasn't sure what. I thought she was talking to Jim, but I couldn't be certain. Coincidentally, Jim called me that evening. It was just after dinner, and I was outside on the patio. It was Friday, and Jenny was sleeping over at a friend's house and would return Saturday afternoon. I saw the caller ID and hesitated. Carol suddenly came outside. "Is that your phone, honey?" she asked as it rang. Now I knew it was a setup. "Why don't you answer it, Mark?" I grunted and picked it up. "What do you want, Jim?" I growled. "Hi, buddy. I just wanted to talk," he said cheerfully. Carol watched me as I replied, "Oh yeah? Well, I want a faithful, loving, honest wife. So what?" "Listen, Mark. I know things have been tense between us, so I wanted to break the ice. I'm having a get-together at my house and want to invite you and Carol. Just a few friends from the area. I'm cooking out, so you don't need to bring anything. Just come and have a good time." I was silent as I considered his offer. The truth was, I felt a bit regretful the past few days. Despite my anger, I still loved Carol. I know Carol misses having a social life like we used to, and I wish I could make things better. Jim used to be a good friend. My best friend, actually. Despite everything, I missed having a buddy to hang out with. I noticed Carol was nearby, pretending not to listen but clearly paying attention. They were so obvious it was almost funny. "I don't know," I said. "Please, Mark," Jim pleaded. "I know how you feel, but we can't go on like this forever. Let's bury the hatchet for a while and have a few beers with friends. Bring Carol, and I'm sure we can all move past this. Okay?" I glanced at Carol. She smiled. "We'll see. I'll talk to Carol and we'll see. I hope you both come. It's just casual. I have all the food and beer taken care of, so don't worry about bringing anything. I know you'll have a blast, buddy. Hope to see you later." I set down the phone, and Carol immediately asked, "Who was that, honey?" "Nobody," I replied. Carol looked puzzled. "Nobody? Tell me who?" she asked sweetly, pretending not to know. "Jim's having a party," I said indifferently. "Oh, really?" she exclaimed, smiling. "That's nice. Yeah, he wants us to go. He wants to bury the hatchet." Carol seemed eager, but just smiled and asked, "So, what did you tell him? Are we going?" "I guess so," I replied. She hugged me tight. After so long apart, I felt myself warming to her. "Oh, great, Mark," she gushed. "I know we'll have a good time." "Don't count on it," I muttered. She kissed my cheek and hurried inside to get ready. I was wary about this whole setup, but I was tired of all the fighting and willing to see how it turned out. Either way, Carol couldn't blame me for not trying to improve things. As for Jim and I being friends again, that was doubtful. The party was nice. About 30 people showed up, more than I expected. Jim had gone all out with food and drinks. Most people were married couples, with a few single women and men. There were enough people that it wasn't obvious I was avoiding Jim. Carol stayed by me most of the time, but went off with her friends for a bit. I hung out with the guys, drinking some beer, but not too much. I wasn't going to get drunk and act like everything was back to normal. I think Carol noticed my distant behavior. "Is everything okay?" she whispered. I mumbled, "Yeah, nice party, isn't it?" "I'm having fun. I hope you are too," she said, looking into my eyes. "Hopefully." Then she asked quietly, "Have you talked to Jim?" My expression darkened, and she noticed. "Sorry. I don't want to upset you, Mark." "Then just leave it alone. You two were such good friends. I hope you will be again." "Forget it, Carol," I told her coolly. "Jim and I will never be friends again. Not like before. He's a jerk and always will be. Let's just enjoy the party and not bring up old memories." Carol didn't drink much, and neither did I. Jim was busy playing host and only came over a couple of times to check on us. He had a woman with him, some attractive coworker, and they shared hosting duties. Carol drifted over to them and brought Jim's date to meet me. I just nodded and let Carol do the talking. I don't even remember her name. She probably thought I was rude, but I didn't care. After a few minutes of awkward conversation, they went to mix drinks. Later, Jim put on some music and people began to dance. Carol asked if I wanted to dance. I said no. She looked a bit disappointed, but didn't complain. As the sun set, couples with children started to leave, and the rest of the crowd began to drink more. A few other couples showed up and joined in. Soon, the beer was flowing and the party got lively. Some wives we knew were no longer dancing with their husbands. A couple of guys asked Carol to dance, and she accepted after getting my silent approval. I stayed in my seat, watching her. Carol is an attractive woman, so it was no surprise that guys kept asking her to dance. She danced to some fast songs, showing off her moves. When the slow songs played, she glanced at me often. Normally, she could be quite flirty at events like this, but tonight she kept it to a minimum. She seemed to enjoy herself, but didn't dance too close with anyone. Nothing like the pictures I saw of her and Jim at the charity event. And she didn't dance with Jim when she noticed I wasn't joining in the wife-swapping atmosphere. She stopped dancing and sat by me. Carol had left my side briefly to talk with her friends when Jim's date came over and asked me to dance. I politely said no. She pouted and asked if I wanted another beer. I declined again. She was a pretty young woman, typical of the girls Jim always had around him, but I had no interest and tried to show I didn't want her company. She didn't get the hint. She sat down next to me, drank her beer, and started chatting. She seemed a bit drunk and kept giggling at things I said that weren't funny. She also kept touching my arm and leg, laughing. She offered me another beer several times, and I kept saying no. She kept trying to get me to dance. At one point, she stood up and pulled on my arm, making a scene. People around us laughed at my reluctance. I was embarrassed and asked her to stop. She did for a while, but then slipped and fell onto my lap. I tried to get her up, but she resisted, laughing and rubbing her body on me. I lifted her off and glanced across the deck. Jim and Carol were there, talking softly but watching me fend off this girl. Suddenly, I realized this whole party was a setup. They were trying to get me to behave badly like they did at the charity event. I shot Carol a harsh look. She cringed, realizing I was onto their trick. I kept pushing the girl away, but she wouldn't stop, so I shoved her off my lap. The people around us laughed as I marched away from her. I passed by Jim and growled, "Nice try, Hall." His expression darkened as I walked away. A few moments later, Carol came over, probably to deny any ulterior motive. I didn't want to hear any more lies and cut her off with a glare. The party was in full swing as I told Carol it was time to leave. She looked disappointed, but didn't argue. I went straight to my car without thanking Jim for the invitation. Carol said it was impolite not to thank him, so she spoke to Jim and his date. Jim glanced at me with a strange look. I was glad he didn't come over because I'm not sure how I would have handled it. Carol said goodbye to her friends, clearly wanting to stay, but respected my wish to leave. The drive home was quiet. Carol mentioned how much fun she had and how nice everything was. I just nodded and stayed silent. Carol kept talking about her friends and how well Jim had set things up, but my silence made the atmosphere tense. I knew the whole thing was a setup. Jim's invitation, Jenny's sleepover, and his girlfriend trying to embarrass me. I was being manipulated and it was infuriating, but I held my tongue, and Carol was relieved I didn't make a scene. When we got home, Carol started making advances. From the time we got home, she was sweet, touching and kissing me all the way to the bedroom. It had been a while since we had been intimate, probably more than a month. Despite my irritation, Carol is a sexy woman, and tonight she was dressed to tease and please. I refused and turned away. I lay there in the dark, thinking about the party. I replayed the evening, remembering her dancing and having fun, talking to Jim and how he kept glancing at me. It was all planned. They were manipulating me. I replayed every second of their conversation and thought about Carol's giddy reaction. I also remembered the night she went out with Jim, how comfortable she was hugging and kissing him, and how eager she was to get him onto the sofa. I know she was drunk and horny, but something about their friendly relationship didn't seem right. Jim's reaction bothered me too. He seemed to enjoy making out with my wife, but was worried about the location. I'm not sure he wouldn't have taken her up on her offer if Jenny and I weren't there. I know Jim has been a friend for years, but the way he made out with my wife and how friendly they were seemed wrong. Had they done this before? Maybe this wasn't the first time they were close. I tried to push these thoughts away because I wanted to trust Carol. I used to trust Jim, too. But a little voice in my head was telling me to be careful. Over dinner, Carol was excited about the party we went to, but didn't mention the charity event. Jim called me a few times after his party, but I didn't answer and let it go to voicemail. He said he was glad we came and wanted to get together again soon. He wanted us to be friends again and said he'd go more than halfway to make that happen. I told Carol that Jim was calling me, but I wished he wouldn't. She seemed pleased and asked if she could invite him over for dinner. When I told her no, Carol frowned and we argued. She eventually told me to get over my hissy fit, as she put it, and reminded me how good a friend Jim was and how he had helped us. I knew Jim was successful at his sales job and made more money than me. I was tired of hearing her praise him so much, but I kept my mouth shut. Carol thought everything was back to normal between us. Maybe Jenny did too. She was now talking about Jim like he was still my friend. I wasn't there yet, but to keep the peace, I stayed quiet. That turned out to be a big mistake. I tried to keep an eye on Carol, but since she worked part-time and I was busy at my job, it wasn't possible. She was always home at night with dinner ready for Jenny and me. We tried to have sex, but she seemed distracted, just going through the motions. I still climaxed, but the little kisses and touches were gone. I was disappointed with our relationship, but my job took so much energy that I didn't have the patience to address it. Carol didn't seem bothered. She kept up the house and took care of Jenny. We were barely making love now, and I guess I should have been happy with that. One night I managed to get off work early and wanted to take Carol out to dinner. Early evening lately meant getting home before 6 o'clock. It would be a late dinner for us, but I thought Jenny could stay at her friend's house that night and we could go out. Even though our finances were tight, I thought we needed some time to reconnect. It had been weeks since we had a real date. I called home, but Carol wasn't there, so I called her work that afternoon. A woman answered and told me Carol wasn't available. Will she be available later? I asked. Not today. She took the afternoon off. She should be back on Monday. Can I take a message? No, I'll try her then. I was confused. She wasn't at work and hadn't called me or mentioned any plans to take the day off. I called her cell phone, but it went to voicemail, so I left a message. Hi, Carol. Just wanted to ask you out for dinner tonight. I miss taking you out and would love to go somewhere nice. Please call me back and I'll make all the arrangements. Normally, I got home by 7 or later. I guess she expected me then, but I was upset when she didn't call back until nearly 6 o'clock. It was too late to make arrangements for Jenny. Hi, Mark, she said cheerfully. Sorry I missed your call, honey. I wanted to take you out, I sighed. I guess now it's too late. Oh, I'm so sorry, baby. I had to meet with a client. It ran a little late, so I couldn't get back to you. Okay then. See you at home, right? Love you. Love you too. The conversation was strange. Meet with a client? When did Carol start meeting with clients? Her coworker never mentioned that. Why take the day off? And why was her phone off? I hardly ever called during the day, so she had no reason to expect me to. But the whole thing felt off, and I didn't know why. I picked up some pizza and went home. When I got there, both Carol and Jenny were waiting. Jenny was happy about the pizza, and Carol apologized for missing my call. I didn't question her, but it was strange and made me suspicious. That night, Carol told me about a big party at the Royal Hotel that weekend, and she wanted to go. It's going to be wonderful, Mark, she gushed until she saw my dark expression. Now don't look at me like that. I know what you're thinking, she said quickly. Don't worry, honey, it's not going to cost you anything. There's no cover charge, and my company is paying for dinner and drinks. I know Jim has been a friend for years, but the way he made out with my wife and how friendly they were seemed wrong. Had they done this before? Maybe this wasn't the first time they were close. I tried to push these thoughts away because I wanted to trust Carol. I used to trust Jim, too, but a little voice in my head was telling me to be careful. Over dinner, Carol was excited about the party we went to, but didn't mention the charity event. Jim called me a few times after his party, but I didn't answer and let it go to voicemail. He said he was glad we came and wanted to get together again soon. He wanted us to be friends again and said he'd go more than halfway to make that happen. I told Carol that Jim was calling me, but I wished he wouldn't. She seemed pleased and asked if she could invite him over for dinner. When I told her no, Carol frowned, and we argued. She eventually told me to get over my hissy fit, as she put it, and reminded me how good a friend Jim was and how he had helped us. I knew Jim was successful at his sales job and made more money than me. I was tired of hearing her praise him so much, but I kept my mouth shut. Carol thought everything was back to normal between us. Maybe Jenny did too. She was now talking about Jim like he was still my friend. I wasn't there yet, but to keep the peace, I stayed quiet. That turned out to be a big mistake. I tried to keep an eye on Carol, but since she worked part-time and I was busy at my job, it wasn't possible. She was always home at night with dinner ready for Jenny and me. We tried to have sex, but she seemed distracted, just going through the motions. I still climaxed, but the little kisses and touches were gone. I was disappointed with our relationship, but my job took so much energy that I didn't have the patience to address it. Carol didn't seem bothered. She kept up the house and took care of Jenny. We were barely making love now, and I guess I should have been happy with that. One night, I managed to get off work early and wanted to take Carol out to dinner. Early evening lately meant getting home before 6 o'clock. It would be a late dinner for us, but I thought Jenny could stay at her friend's house that night and we could go out. It's some kind of public relations event to attract customers. There's going to be a band, dancing, and everything. We're going to have a blast this weekend. Are you sure we're free this weekend? I asked. Carol gave me a goofy grin. Oh, stop it, you wet blanket. You know we are. We don't go anywhere anymore. And don't worry, you won't have to pay a dime. I listened to her excitement about the party. I wished there was some way out of it, but she had her mind made up. Despite my reluctance, I was actually looking forward to taking her to this party. My wife is very attractive and fun. I wanted to take her to a nice private dinner and maybe some dancing, but we needed a night out together. And maybe this public party was it. Little did I know, the night before the party, she hit me with the rest of the story. She was talking about the party when she said, "And you know, Jim's going to be there too." Jim? What the heck? I didn't know that. We were finishing dinner, and Jenny was already in her room. Carol was just staring at her plate, moving the food around with her fork. "Yes, honey, Jim said he would be there." "You spoke to him?" I blurted out in surprise. She looked startled for a second, then quickly regained her composure. "I heard from someone at work," she said without looking up. "Why is Jim going to be there?" "I think he's dating one of the clients." "You mean that woman he had at his party?" "No, not her. Somebody else, I think." "Jim's going to be there," I repeated angrily. "Tell me the truth, Carol. Have you spoken to him about this party?" She glanced up at me with a guilty look and mumbled, "No, not really. I just heard something. Maybe I forgot." "He called you, didn't he?" I accused, feeling a knot in my stomach. "I guess maybe," she said, her casual attitude suddenly turning to irritation. "Yes, he called me. So what?" "You know I don't like that guy," I spat. "And now I find out you're speaking to him behind my back." "It's not like that," she answered. "He's a friend. He just called to say he'd be there and hoped we would too." I stood up with an angry expression. I shoved the rest of my food into the trash and rinsed off my plate. "That's just great! After all we've been through, you're talking to him behind my back." "He's our friend, Mark. My friend too," she said defensively. "He's no friend of mine. And you're calling him and probably sneaking around with him behind my back?" Her eyes looked straight at me as she stated, "You can't tell me who to talk to. I'm a grown woman and can choose my own friends. I just wanted you to know ahead of time that he'll be there. I was just being polite and didn't want to spring it on you and make you think it was a setup. Can't you see that?" "Yeah, I see exactly. I already told you that I want you to stop talking to him. I guess you don't care about my feelings." "That's not true. Just don't have any contact with him, you hear?" "No, damn it, Mark. I'll talk to him if I want," she replied curtly. "He's a friend and I will not shut him out. If you want to ignore Jim, I can't stop you, but I'm not going to turn my back on a friend of ours." "So that's it?" "Yes," she said with sympathy as she placed her hand on mine. "I don't want you to be mad. I want my husband back. Please go to this party with me. All my friends will be there. It's important to me, honey." I left it at that. I was going, but I wasn't happy about it. The night of the party, I drove Jenny over to her friend's house. She was going to stay the night so Carol and I could party as late as we liked. Carol spent most of the evening getting ready. She had her hair and makeup done. I just had to put on a suit and shoes, which took me about 10 minutes. Carol must have spent over an hour in the bedroom. When she came down, she looked stunning in a skimpy black cocktail dress that showed off her curves. Immediately, a dark thought crossed my mind. Where'd you get that dress? I've never seen it before. Carol shot me a smirk. I bought it with my own money, Mark, so don't get all pissy about where it came from. I do make money, you know, even if it's not as much as you. And I bought the shoes, too, if you're wondering. I tried to swallow my anger, but it was hard. Her long, shapely legs were exposed by the short hemline of the skirt. The high heels made her calves flex every time she took a step. The dress was low-cut, showing a bit of cleavage. "You ready?" she asked, slipping her arm in mine. "Let's go out on the porch and wait for Jim." My jaw dropped. "Jim?" I gasped. "What do you mean? Jim's going to pick us up and take us there?" "Yes," she said, as if I should have known. "That way you can drink if you want." "But why?" I sputtered. "This is ridiculous." Even though our finances were tight, I thought we needed some time to reconnect. It had been weeks since we had a real date. I called home, but Carol wasn't there, so I called her work that afternoon. A woman answered and told me Carol wasn't available. "Will she be available later?" I asked. "Not today. She took the afternoon off. She should be back on Monday. Can I take a message?" "No. I'll try her then." I was confused. She wasn't at work and hadn't called me or mentioned any plans to take the day off. I called her cell phone, but it went to voicemail, so I left a message. "Hi, Carol. Just wanted to ask you out for dinner tonight. I miss taking you out and would love to go somewhere nice. Please call me back and I'll make all the arrangements." Normally, I got home by 7 or later. I guess she expected me then. But I was upset when she didn't call back until nearly 6 o'clock. It was too late to make arrangements for Jenny. "Hi, Mark," she said cheerfully. "Sorry I missed your call, honey." "I wanted to take you out," I sighed. "I guess now it's too late." "Oh, I'm so sorry, baby. I had to meet with a client. It ran a little late, so I couldn't get back to you." "Okay, then. See you at home, right? Love you. Love you, too." The conversation was strange. Meet with a client? When did Carol start meeting with clients? Her coworker never mentioned that. Why take the day off, and why was her phone off? I hardly ever called during the day, so she had no reason to expect me to. But the whole thing felt off, and I didn't know why. I picked up some pizza and went home. When I got there, both Carol and Jenny were waiting. Jenny was happy about the pizza, and Carol apologized for missing my call. I didn't question her, but it was strange and made me suspicious. That night, Carol told me about a big party at the Royal Hotel that weekend, and she wanted to go. "It's going to be wonderful, Mark," she gushed until she saw my dark expression. "Now don't look at me like that. I know what you're thinking," she said quickly. "Don't worry, honey. It's not going to cost you anything. There's no cover charge, and my company is paying for dinner and drinks. We can just drive over there. I don't need to go with him." Carol held my gaze and spoke firmly. "I already spoke to him, and he's coming over right now." "You spoke to him? But why?" "I wasn't sure if you were going," she said, her blue eyes staring straight at me. "You were such a snit at the last event. I wasn't sure if you'd stand me up again. You took Jenny away, and I was worried you might bail on me. There's no way I was going to miss this event tonight. So in case you got cold feet, I called Jim, and he said he'd take me." "Take you? Was he prepared to take you without me?" "No, I mean I didn't want to miss it, Mark." I was furious. Carol was making plans with Jim behind my back again. It felt just like the last time. "I know you didn't want to go," she explained calmly. "I thought you might try to blow me off. Jim's a gentleman, and he said he would take me if you didn't show up. So he's on his way over right now. If you want to go, be ready in 10 minutes or we're leaving without you." "Damn it!" I shot back, growing angrier by the second. "So you weren't going to wait for me? Why don't you and Jim just go without me? Maybe I didn't want to go anyway." Carol's expression grew angry like I had never seen before. Her cheeks turned bright red. She stood up and stomped into the kitchen. "Do what you want, you jerk!" she shot over her shoulder. I heard Carol pouring herself a glass of wine in the kitchen. I took a deep breath, trying to make sense of this change of plans. I went to the bathroom to wash my face and calm down. While I was there, the doorbell rang and I knew Jim had arrived. Carol must have let him in and I could hear them talking. When I came down, I saw them chatting. My blood boiled and I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Since you two already planned to go together, just leave," I told Carol. "Come on, honey, don't behave like that," Carol mumbled. I don't want to go if he is going with us. I wanted to go with my wife, not his friend. Carol stood up and left. I guessed our marriage was over. She returned later that night and just got into bed. The next morning, Carol was still giving me the cold shoulder. We spoke about normal things like the girls' schedules and household chores, but there was a lack of warmth that was obvious. Work was tough too. My boss had me working late most nights, so I wasn't around as much as I wanted. One evening, I got off early and came home to find Jim in the kitchen having coffee with Carol. I nearly exploded, but they barely reacted when I came in. When I asked why he was there, he seemed unsure before Carol mentioned she needed some boxes brought down from the attic, and since I wasn't around, she asked him to help. Jim nodded and said it was on his way home from work, so it was no problem. I accepted her explanation and went upstairs to shower. When I came down, he was gone. I had another hard week at work. It sucked so much. I was desperate to keep things calm when I finally got home. Somehow, Carol seemed to have accepted Jim back into our house. Any complaint I had about that led to a huge argument. A couple of times when I got home late, I found out Jim had already eaten dinner with my family while I ate the leftovers. Jenny was excited and told me Jim had given her a new pair of sneakers. Another time, she said he bought her a jacket. Each time, she seemed delighted to have him around, and Carol did too. One evening, I got home and found that Carol had cooked a great meal. Jim was there again. They were all chatting loudly as I walked in. Carol glanced at me without speaking, almost daring me to make a fuss. When I didn't, they went back to their conversation, ignoring me as I sat down to join them. It was around that time when I began to feel like a third wheel, an outsider in my own home. Carol and I were barely speaking, and sex was not happening. I felt like Carol didn't care if I was there or not. If Jim was there when I got home, he acted friendly and asked me about my work. He acted like he wanted to know how things were going, so I replied, not wanting to make a fuss about his presence. But soon, I began to resent how often he was around and how eager my family seemed to accept him. One evening, after a particularly long visit, I took Jim out onto the back patio to have a word with him. I told him that I was uncomfortable with how often he was around and that if he came over from now on, I'd like a phone call beforehand because it was only polite to call me first. He listened quietly, gazing at me with a strange, uninterested look. He said it was no problem and that he didn't want to cause any issues. He promised to respect my wishes from now on. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. That evening, when Carol and I got in bed, I remembered how happy she seemed during dinner, chatting and laughing at Jim's jokes. I also thought about my conversation with Jim. I had been working late a lot, and Carol and I weren't spending much time together. Something inside told me I needed to reconnect with my lovely wife. She was in such a good mood tonight. After dinner, I helped her clean up. She seemed unusually happy, and we were talking normally for a change. Jenny went to bed, and I followed Carol to the bedroom. I started hinting that I wanted to be close. I knew she could tell I was interested, but she didn't respond. She didn't reject me outright, but she wasn't receptive. When she finished in the bathroom, she came out wearing a long flannel nightgown, a clear sign she wasn't in the mood. Once she was under the covers, I moved closer and snuggled against her. My hand landed on her stomach, and she immediately pushed it away, turning over to face the other direction. Normally, I would give up, but I was still upset about having Jim over, and it had been a while since we were intimate. The scent of her hair and the warmth of her body had me aroused. Jenny was asleep, and it wasn't that late, so I decided to try again, hoping she'd change her mind. I slid over, held her hips, and spooned against her. "Honey, you look so sexy tonight. I'm really turned on," I whispered, pressing against her. "Not tonight, Mark," she said. When I didn't stop, she repeated, "I said not tonight. I'm tired. Maybe some other time, okay?" I was stunned by her rejection. It had been weeks since we were intimate. "Come on, baby. It's been a while. You know how much you turn me on," I said. She pushed my hand off and repeated, "Not tonight." I kept trying until she spun around and said harshly, "Will you stop?" I said I was tired, and I meant it. "What the hell, Carol?" I snapped. "You've been shutting me out for weeks now. What am I supposed to do?" "I'm just tired, Mark. Please don't make a big deal out of this." I sat up and threw the covers back. "What the hell's going on, Carol?" I turned on the bedside lamp. "We haven't made love in over a month. You've been distant and mean for weeks. Is there something wrong with you? With me? You may have forgotten, but I'm still your husband. You need to talk to me." My angry tone and harsh expression finally seemed to get through. She turned over and glared at me, her blue eyes flashing. "You jerk! I told you I'm tired, but you don't care about how I feel. I take care of the kids and the house, and I stay home waiting for you, but you never take me out. You never bring me flowers anymore. You don't even come home on time. Now you just want to use me to satisfy yourself and go to sleep." "Use you? What?" I was caught off guard by her bitterness. I drew back as she sat up, shaking her finger at me. "You selfish creep! I've given up so much." "All right then, Mark. You want sex? Is that it? Is that what it'll take for you to leave me alone?" In one quick motion, Carol pulled her nightgown up to her waist, lay back down with her eyes closed, and spread her legs. "Well," she said, glaring at me, "don't just sit there with a stupid look on your face. Just do it. Get it over with so I can sleep. Isn't that what you want?" I was stunned and filled with mixed emotions. She opened her eyes and glared at me like I was some disgusting old man. There was no love at all. I decided to just lay back down and forget it. But Carol didn't seem to want to stop. She was on a roll and wasn't going to let it go. She looked down and saw that I was no longer aroused. "Come on, Mark," she coaxed with a weird grin. "What's the matter, honey? Lost your nerve now that your wife is ready? Are you done? I bet Jim wouldn't refuse me. He wouldn't lose his excitement if I offered it to him. You're such a loser. You can't even get it up if the woman isn't totally compliant." "Well, honey, are you ready?" She smiled wickedly and chuckled. "I thought so." She closed her legs and pulled the cover over herself. I heard her whisper just loud enough for me to hear, "Loser." Her last remark really got to me. She had been mean before, but never like this. Something inside me snapped. "I guess you're Jim's meat now," I shouted as I bolted out of bed and headed for the door. She screamed, "You jerk! At least he's not a loser like you." I stomped out of the room, slamming the door so hard the whole house shook. I felt bad that Jenny had probably woken up from the noise. I was angrier than I had ever been, even more than the night after the charity event. The next morning, still upset, I left the house without saying a word. Carol didn't mention what had happened, and neither did I. She made breakfast for Jenny as I stormed out of the house, barely having slept and still furious. I knew something was seriously wrong with our marriage. A couple of days later, I came home from work and saw Jim's car in the driveway. I was not happy about that. I was home on time for a change and hoped Carol and I could talk and have a family night without him around. I was upset to see him there again, especially since Carol and I hadn't spoken since our blow-up. I hoped tonight we could finally talk and sort things out. When I saw his car and knew he hadn't called, I was disturbed. I thought a fun visit over dinner might help, maybe even lead to Carol and me getting closer. I entered the house and found them together on the sofa. "Hi, honey," I called out. I looked at him and said abruptly, "Jim?" "Hello, Mark," he replied quietly. "What's for dinner?" I asked Carol as I hung up my jacket. She gave me a blank stare. "There's roast beef and veggies in the fridge. You can heat it up in the microwave," she replied calmly, pointing to the recliner. "But first, can you sit down here, Mark? We need to talk." "We?" That was strange. I remained standing, surprised at her flat tone and distant look. I wondered what was so important. "What's up, honey? Where's Jenny?" "She's having a sleepover at Becky's. You didn't tell me." Ignoring my question, Carol asked, "Would you like a drink, Mark? Maybe a glass of wine or a beer?" "No, I'm fine." I noticed how close she and Jim were on the sofa. They usually sat at the kitchen table when I got home, so this was unusual. Carol took a sip of her wine and turned to me. "There's something we need to discuss, Mark. Why don't you have a seat?" She gestured to the recliner again and glanced at Jim, who gave her a subtle nod. "What's going on here?" I blurted out, feeling quite uncomfortable. "Please sit down," she said more forcefully, pointing to the chair. With serious unease, I sat down. "Mark, there's no easy way to say this." She took a breath, and then the words flowed out. "You know I love you and Jenny, but things haven't been good between us for a while. I know you work hard for the family and you're a good father, but there's something wrong with our marriage." "Our marriage?" I whispered, my throat tightening. I glanced at my former best friend who was staring at the floor. Carol took another sip, glanced at him, and continued. "I'm not happy, Mark, and I haven't been for a while," she said softly but firmly. "I know you aren't either. We haven't been close for months. Our sex life is terrible, and whatever fondness we had seems to have gone cold. I was stunned she would bring up our lack of intimacy in front of Jim. It was very private, and I wanted to keep it that way. "Gee, Carol," I sputtered. She smiled wickedly and chuckled. "I thought so." She closed her legs and pulled the cover over herself. I heard her whisper loud enough for me to hear, "Loser." Her last remark made me furious. She had been mean before, but never like this. Something inside me broke. "I guess you're just Jim's plaything now," I cried, bolting out of bed and heading for the door. She screamed, "You jerk! At least he's not a loser like you." I stomped out of the room before I did something rash. I nearly ripped the bedroom door off its hinges when I slammed it. I knew the whole house shook and felt bad that Jenny had probably woken up from the noise. My temper was nearly out of control. I'd never been so angry at her before. This was even worse than the night after the charity event. The next morning, still upset, I left the house without saying a word. Carol didn't mention what happened, and neither did I. She made breakfast for Jenny while I stormed out. I barely slept and was seething as I left. I knew something was seriously wrong with our marriage. A couple of days later, I came home from work and saw Jim's car in the driveway. I was not happy about that. I was home on time for a change and hoped Carol and I could talk, have dinner and a family night without him around. So I was quite upset to see he was there again since the night of our argument. We hadn't spoken. I knew she was unhappy about the argument, and so was I. I hoped we would eventually talk and get over it, but we hadn't. I thought maybe tonight was the night. When I saw his car and knew he hadn't called, I was disturbed. I planned to remind him of his promise later, but at the same time, I knew how much Carol liked having him around and was hoping his presence would somehow improve our strained relationship. A fun visit over dinner with a friend might help things. Maybe Carol and I could even reconnect if she had calmed down. I entered the house and was surprised to find them together on the sofa. "Hi, honey," I called out. I looked at him and said abruptly, "Jim?" "Hello, Mark," he replied quietly. "What's for dinner?" I asked Carol as I hung up my jacket. She gave me a blank stare. "There's roast beef and veggies in the fridge. You can heat it up in the microwave," she replied calmly, pointing to the recliner. "But first, can you sit down here, Mark? We need to talk." "We?" That was strange. I remained standing, surprised by her flat tone and distant look. I began to wonder what was so important. "What's up, honey? Where's Jenny?" "She's having a sleepover at Becky's. You didn't tell me." Ignoring my question, Carol asked, "Would you like a drink, Mark? Maybe a glass of wine or a beer?" "No, I'm fine." I noticed how close she and Jim were on the sofa. They usually sat at the kitchen table when I got home, so this was unusual. Carol took a sip of her wine and turned to me. "There's something we need to discuss, Mark. Why don't you have a seat?" She gestured to the recliner again and glanced at Jim. He nodded subtly. "What's going on here?" I blurted out, feeling quite uncomfortable. "Please sit down," she said more forcefully, pointing to the chair. With serious unease, I sat down. "Mark, there's no easy way to say this." She took a breath, and then the words flowed out. "You know I love you and Jenny, but things haven't been good between us for a while. I know you work hard for the family, and you're a good father, but there's something wrong with our marriage." "What?" I whispered, my throat tightening. I glanced at my former best friend who was staring at the floor. Carol took another sip, glanced at him, and continued. "I'm not happy, Mark, and I haven't been for a while," she admitted in a soft but firm tone. "I know you aren't either. We haven't been close for months. Our sex life is terrible, and whatever fondness we had seems to have gone cold." I was stunned she would bring up our lack of intimacy in front of Jim. It was very private, and I wanted to keep it that way. "Gee, Carol," I sputtered, "this isn't something to talk about in public. I don't think Jim wants to hear about that." Carol gazed at me, her eyes narrowing. I could almost see a glimmer of pity. "I'm afraid it is, Mark," she replied indifferently. "Jim knows exactly how I feel. I've been seeing him for the past few months, and we've grown close. Closer than I ever expected, and closer than you and I have ever been. Not something to talk about in public, you know. I don't think Jim wants to hear about that." Carol gazed at me, her eyes narrowing. I could almost see a glimmer of pity. "I'm afraid it is, Mark," she replied indifferently. Jim knows exactly how I feel. I've been seeing him for the past few months, and we've grown close. Closer than I ever expected, and closer than you and I have ever been. I felt like the floor just collapsed. I gulped. What the hell? I noticed they were holding hands. Jim gave her hand a little squeeze as she continued breaking my heart. Yes, Mark, I love you, but I'm not in love with you anymore. I've been unhappy for a while, and Jim has tried to help. He's been a great friend to me, and we are together now. We've fallen in love. What? No, damn you! I rose to my feet and glared at my former best friend and unfaithful wife. I was suddenly angry, hurt, amazed, and confused. This was unbelievable. You must be kidding. This is some sick joke, right? If looks could kill, Jim would have been struck dead. Carol just took another sip of wine, shrugged indifferently, and sighed. Her gaze of pity infuriated me. It's true, Mark. I'm sorry. Come on, Carol, Jim said. Please sit back down, Mark. We're all adults here. Let's be civil about this, Carol said with surprising control. Seething with indignation, I asked, how long? If I expected her to respond angrily, I was wrong. She seemed to have practiced her speech because she was in complete control. Her beautiful face showed no emotion. I know this is hard for you, Mark, and I never wanted it to happen, she said calmly. But it did. As you and I have grown apart, Jim has been there for me to help and support me. And to cheat on me with you, I interrupted. Yes, we have been seeing each other, Carol admitted. We couldn't hide it any longer. We didn't want you to find out from someone else, so we had to tell you the truth. I lost it. My brain was swirling with emotions. She's cheating on me, my beautiful wife and my jerk best friend, ex-best friend now. You're cheating, lying. I cried in despair. My face grew hot and my expression harsh as I asked, tell me, my lying, cheating wife, has he slept with you yet? Carol stiffened and looked a little shaky before flashing a cool stare. Yes, Mark. Jim and I are lovers. I glared at Jim and snapped, you backstabbing jerk. You took advantage of our marital problems. I thought you were my friend. I trusted you, and you do this? You sleep with my wife, and now you're taking her from me? I started to move toward them, and Jim suddenly stood up. His tall, thick frame towered over me. He held out his hands in a defensive gesture. Please, Mark, just settle down, he told me. We didn't plan this, buddy. It just happened. Don't call me buddy, you creep. You're no friend of mine. Come on, Mark. You know I care about you. I feel terrible about how this worked out, but I love Carol. I can't help it. I want her to be happy. And she's certainly not happy the way things are. You're not happy either if you're honest about it. You don't know anything, you jerk! I yelled, nearly out of control. Please, Mark, Carol said, rising from her seat. I know this will be hard for you, but we can't stay married. It's really something I have to do. I will make this as easy for you as I can. Jim will support me and Jenny. My Jenny! I screamed. She could have hit me with a 2x4 and it would have hurt less than what she just said. I'm her mother, Carol pleaded. She needs me. And Jim, I asked, fuming. You're cheating with him and you think you can take my daughter? You sick witch! You're not taking my daughter. Go screw Jim. You both can go to hell. But I'll never give Jenny up. Never. She's your daughter, Carol said, her voice rising for the first time. You don't have to give her up. She's yours and always will be. Please, Mark, Jim said, pleading. Let's be reasonable, okay? What happens between Carol and me won't affect you being her father. It's just that Jenny needs her mother to take care of her. You'll have all the visitation you want. Don't think we'll keep you from her. But I love Carol, and she loves me. Jenny will always be your daughter. But when she's with us, she'll be very well taken care of. Man, I assure you of that, my friend. Friend? I spat. You're no friend. You're a backstabbing snake, stealing my wife and now trying to take my daughter. Now I see why Carol and I couldn't get along. You've been undermining our marriage the whole time, pretending to be a friend while trying to steal Carol and Jenny from me. You're the worst. I must have called him a few more names, but I don't remember. Losing my wife and the thought of losing my precious daughter made me insane. I turned my anger toward my former best friend and made my first big mistake. You creep, I'll kill you! I cried, launching myself at the big guy and swinging a fist at his face. Jim was taller and much heavier. He had always been big and athletic ever since I knew him. He easily deflected my punch and shoved me into an end table. I stumbled onto the floor, embarrassed and in pain, but quickly got to my feet. Carol screamed, No, stop it! As I launched another swing at Jim. This time he caught my fist in midair with as little effort as if he was holding back a child. Fighting has never been my strong point, so it was stupid to attack him like this. Damn it, Mark! Jim shouted, shoving me back into a nearby chair. Just listen for a minute and get control of yourself. Carol stood next to him, staring down at me with a look of disbelief, pity, and amazement. Jim had deflected my attack with so little effort. I felt humiliated. Please, Mark, she pleaded. It doesn't have to be this way. Jim and I aren't asking anything from you. He makes enough to support me and Jenny without a problem. Jenny will always be your daughter, and of course, I'll give you generous visitation rights. Never, I replied. Come on, Mark, Jim said with pity. You may not think so right now, but we can still be friends. You know I care about you. But I love Carol. I know this will take time, and I'm going to help as much as I can. He took a breath and said, We can't help that we fell in love, man. Just accept it, and everything will be a lot smoother. We both still care about you a lot. I'll help you get through this, and Jenny will always know you're her father. I'll never get in the way of your relationship with her. I was still smarting from my humiliating beatdown. Carol was watching, sobbing a little, but her expression was more pity than sympathy. Jim just stood there waiting for my next reaction. He worked out regularly, having a lot of time for it, being single and not having to provide for a family. My job and family responsibilities left me with almost no free time. I was out of shape from working long hours to support my family. I could never take him in a fair fight, but my anger overcame my good sense, and I wasn't giving up yet. I acted like I was calming down, stood up, straightened my clothes, and took a deep breath. They both watched me warily. Carol in her high heels was nearly my height. Jim was much taller, looking down at me as I shot him a look of pure hate. Well, this sure is a surprise. The two people I trust most in the world have just stabbed me in the back. I'm sorry, Carol whimpered. I couldn't let you go on thinking we were fine. We couldn't do that to you. Yeah, right, I whispered dejectedly. Well, screw you both. Please, Mark, Jim said. I feel terrible about this, you know, but we respect you too much to just go behind your back. We still care about you a lot. Yeah, I can tell, I said sarcastically. Please understand, Carol said with sad eyes. I didn't mean for it to work out like this. It just happened. I'm so sorry, honey. She went to hug me, but I surprised them both and pushed her back against Jim hard. She stumbled and fell back against his chest, and he caught her before she fell. In that split second, he was vulnerable. I quickly swung my fist as hard as I could and slammed it into Jim's head. His eyes widened, and his face grimaced as my knuckles connected with his nose. There was a sickening thud of bones snapping and blood splattering onto the carpet. Carol screamed in panic as Jim collapsed at her feet, blood spurting from his nose like a fountain. He was woozy but still coherent. I was on him in a second, swinging my fist into his bleeding face, but he recovered quickly, taking a few blows to the head before pushing me away. You idiot, he shouted in a weird nasal tone. He started to come at me, but Carol pulled his arm. No, Jim, don't, she cried, holding him back. I wanted him to come at me, but he just stood there, wincing with his nose dripping blood. Come on, wife stealer, I goaded, trying to get him to fight. You can steal her behind my back, but you're just a gutless creep in a fair fight. Need a woman to protect you? Can't fight your own battles? Hiding behind a woman's skirt? What's wrong with you? You loser? His eyes raged, but Carol clung to his arm. He knew he was the winner anyway, getting my wife in the end. Screw you, Mark, he finally said. You're lucky she's here to protect you. Don't pull this again, or I'm going to kick your butt. Big talk, I growled, my hands in a fighting stance. Jim relaxed and let Carol pull him away. He took out a handkerchief and mopped up the blood flowing from his nose. They proceeded to the front door in silence before Carol turned back to me angrily. It didn't have to be this way, she snapped. We tried to let you down easily, Mark, but you had to get physical. Screw you and screw him too, I told her bitterly. Oh, I guess you've already done that. Carol's face twisted in anger, but she didn't speak. Then I noticed 2 suitcases sitting by the closet. Jim picked one up and headed for the front door, casting me angry glances as he left. Carol picked up the smaller one and followed him out. She stopped once, looking back at me like she wanted to say something, but instead just turned and left. As they drove off, I bolted to my car and drove like a maniac to Becky's house. I parked and ran to the front door, knocking frantically. Becky's mother answered with a sad look on her face. "Hello, Mark," she said softly. "I know why you're here. Carol called a few minutes ago and spoke to Jenny. Jenny said her mom told her to leave the house and go somewhere. I don't know what she told her. I think they're picking her up, but they didn't say where." "You knew about this?" I asked in disbelief. "Well, not everything. Carol asked me to keep it quiet, so I did." She looked at me with the same pity my wife did. "I'm so sorry about all this. I always thought you two had a great marriage. I didn't know about your problems." "Yeah, I didn't either," I replied angrily. "Do you know where Jenny went? Any friends she has around here? I really need to find her." "I don't, Mark. I'm sorry. I would tell you if I did. You know that." "That's bullshit," I growled. "She's cheating and you're covering for her. I wonder if your husband knows you're covering for a woman who's cheating on her husband. Maybe you were too, and you two cover for each other. I don't have time for cheating liars anymore, so don't ever speak to me again." She glared at me before slamming the door in my face. I left her house in a blaze of despair. Once again, my scheming wife and ex-friend had outsmarted me. They had everything covered. Carol had betrayed me, and now Jenny was gone too. I couldn't think straight anymore. My mind was swirling with all the issues suddenly thrust upon me. I went home to an empty house feeling like I was dead inside. Somehow I managed to get to work the next day. After a few hours, I began to feel a little bit normal again. The intense accounting workload was no longer a dreary job. It was a blessing, something to keep my mind off my problems. After work, I went home and tried to think straight. The first thing I did was call Jenny. "Hello, Dad," she answered right away. "Jenny, my God, I miss you so much, sweetie. I want to come get you and bring you home with me, honey." There was an awkward pause. "I'm with Mom," she answered in a tense tone. "Mom said I should tell you that I'm fine." "And where are you? I want to come get you." "I can't, Dad. Mom and Uncle Jim told me—" "Stop! He's not your uncle! Never mention that backstabber again, Jenny." I spoke out of anger without thinking about how it would sound to Jenny. "Why?" "I'm sorry, Jenny. I'm just so upset, honey." I apologized as she started to cry. "Please, just tell me where you are. I'll get you." "I can't, Dad," she sobbed. "Mom said I have to wait a bit before I can see you again. She said you're pretty upset right now." "I'm upset with her, not you, baby," I interrupted. "They stabbed me in the back, but you did nothing wrong. Nothing. I just need to see you. We need to be together, please." Suddenly, the line was cut off. I called her back, but it went to voicemail. I pounded the table in frustration. No doubt Carol was filling her head with all sorts of lies. I bolted back to the car and zoomed over to Jim's house. I ran up to the door and pounded on it, but there was no answer. I checked the garage and found his SUV wasn't there. Neither was his BMW. I walked around the house looking in windows but didn't see anyone. Suddenly, a police car drove up. The officer got out glaring at me and called me over. "I'm looking for my daughter," I told him before he could ask. "Yeah," he said, looking at me with little sympathy. "I know. The neighbors called the station and said someone was poking around the house. I also heard about your separation and the problem with your wife." "Who told you that?" I asked warily. "Does it matter?" he said. "You have to go now. You're not wanted around this house. If you return, you're trespassing, and I'll have to cuff you and take you to the station for questioning." I was nearly out of control. I took a deep breath and got in my car. Jim must have taken them somewhere out of my reach. They outsmarted me again. Of course, I got a lawyer, and he gave me all the bad news. I'd have to split all our assets, including the house. Carol would no doubt get custody of Jenny despite her cheating on me. I might have a chance for custody if the judge found that I was a good parent and that Jenny would agree to live with me now. That was my saving grace despite the brief phone call with her. I knew she loved me. I had been there when she was sick, took her to after-school events, and went to her school for parent-teacher nights. I was there for every major event in her life, but now I was alone. Carol had Jim to keep her company. I needed someone to help me get through this terrible situation. I needed Jenny in my life and knew that she'd be with me so we could be some sort of family again. I was served with the divorce papers at home. Carol knew my work schedule and must have informed her lawyer. She attached a note to the decree that said she didn't want to embarrass me by serving me at work. Tough luck. I could not care less about that. The papers said our finances would be split 50-50ths. We could sell the house and split the proceeds, or she could buy me out and live there with Jenny. According to her lawyer, she preferred to live in our house so Jenny could stay in the same school district. We'd each keep our cars. There was no alimony, but I'd have to pay for Jenny's custody. My lawyer said it was a fair split. I didn't agree. After all, she ran out on me and had been fooling around for months. Jenny was my daughter, and I wanted full custody. My lawyer said I was being foolish but would submit a counteroffer from what I told him. In the meantime, that jerk Jim took my family on a vacation to Florida. I never found out exactly where. Jenny did call me, but our conversations were strained and she acted nervous. I tried to tell her I loved her and needed her, but I came off sounding desperate. No surprise, I was desperate to get back some shred of self-respect. With my family gone, I threw myself into work. There was always something to do for a licensed accountant, and I worked overtime as much as I could. I never knew when Carol and Jenny returned from Florida. I guess they didn't want me to know. On the day of our court date, I arrived with my lawyer, and Carol and Jim arrived with theirs. I cast Jim a hateful look, trying to kill him with my eyes. He just looked away. Carol just looked indifferent, as if the breakup of our family was already in the past. When it came time for the final decision, the judge took Jenny into his private chambers and spoke to her for nearly an hour. I kept asking my lawyer why it was taking so long. I knew she must miss me by now. I hadn't seen her in weeks. She just had to tell the judge that she wanted to stay with me, and I could finally get on with my life. The judge finally came out and issued his ruling. He said it was a difficult decision, and that neither Carol nor I should dismiss how hard it was for a 14-year-old to make such a choice. It ended up that Jenny was going to live with Carol and Jim. I nearly collapsed and barely heard a word after that. I walked out of the courtroom before the judge finished, ignoring his calls to sit back down. In the hallway, my lawyer came out and told me the rest of the judge's decision. I would have to pay for custody and either buy out Carol's half of the house or sell it and split the equity. He seemed pleased with the decision, looking proud that I wouldn't have to pay alimony and that Carol had to give me generous visitation rights. "You came out okay, Mark," he said, slapping me on the back. "It could have been a lot worse." I was speechless. Carol emerged from the courtroom, glanced at me with a pitying look, and Jim just left without saying anything. He took her by the arm and led my cheating wife out of the courthouse. I never saw Jenny. I was in a daze as I walked out to the parking lot. Carol came over to me. Jim stood a few yards away looking guilty. I noticed he still had a bandage on his nose. "This can work out, Mark," Carol said pleasantly. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but Jenny loves you and wants to be with you. She'll live with us, but you can see her anytime you want. Both Jim and I want you to be in Jenny's life, and we'll do everything we can to accommodate and make this transition as smooth as possible for you." I just stared at her in disbelief. Was she insane? When I didn't answer, Carol said in a soothing tone, "Please, Mark. I know this is difficult. We want you to accept this judgment. Let's work to make Jenny's life as smooth as we can. It's for her benefit, you know." Finally, my mind returned. I looked over at Jim, who was gazing blankly at me. Then I looked straight into Carol's eyes and sneered with as much venom as possible. "Screw you!" I glared at Jim and said, "Go to hell and take him with you." Carol's wistful expression disappeared. Jim heard me and glared. My lawyer tugged at my arm and tried to pull me away. "Come on, Mark, this won't help." "Let's go," Carol said with irritation. "Damn it, Mark, stop being childish. You have to help Jenny for her sake. This isn't easy for her either. She's your daughter and she needs you now more than ever." "No," I said bitterly. "She's your daughter now, not mine. Don't ever contact me again, you or Jenny, and keep your boyfriend away from me too. If you ever come near me again, I'll—" My lawyer shouted before I could say more. He pulled me away firmly and said, "Just stop talking, Mark. It won't help. Wait until you calm down, damn it." Carol had tears in her eyes as she pleaded, "She's your daughter, Mark. She needs you right now." "Screw you," I told her. I looked at Jim, who was staring back at me with obvious anger. "Screw you too, Jim, my former good friend. What a joke." My lawyer dragged me away as I kept yelling, "Go ahead and screw my wife, you jerk! Screw her all you want, you backstabbing creep!" Everyone around us was watching and listening. An officer came out to see what was going on. and I finally stopped yelling. They pulled me around to my car as my lawyer tried to explain the details of the judgment. I heard I had to pay child support for Jenny, and I needed to come up with money for the house and a few other things. At some point, I just yanked my arm away and ran to my car, sobbing. The next day, the lock on our finances was released. Carol had taken half of our savings and investments, all the money I had been saving for our family. There was some left for me, but not enough to do much more than survive. I received an official letter asking me to either move or provide her part of the equity in our house if I planned to sell it. I hastily sent back that I would sell it. With a policeman in tow, Carol returned the day after and retrieved her car and all of her personal items. She also claimed most of the furniture, which I had paid for. When she finished picking out her things, she tried to speak to me. I told her, "Screw you," and walked away. The cop warned me to be civil, but I didn't care. When they walked out of the house, Carol had tears in her eyes. She got to the front yard and asked the cop to wait. She turned to me and said she wanted to talk. I went out onto the front yard and the cop stayed nearby. We just stood there for a moment in silence. I waited with an indifferent look as my wife tried to gather her thoughts. "Please don't hate me, Mark," she said, wiping her tears. "I know you're not happy right now. It's not easy, but it will all work out in the end." I wanted to curse her out and say never. Instead, I kept quiet and let her speak. "We weren't happy together, and you know it," she continued. "Things were getting worse between us, and I just couldn't go on." She stopped sniffling and wiped her eyes. She took a breath, and her expression grew more determined. "But Mark, what I really need to talk to you about is that I need your help with Jenny. She's not happy right now. Our divorce was hard on her." I snorted as if it wasn't my fault. Carol picked up on that but ignored my insinuation. "Please, just listen," she pleaded. "I spoke to her teacher and her schoolwork is suffering, Mark. She barely speaks to me now and doesn't see her friends anymore. She stays in her room nearly all the time. I'm worried and I know she needs you. I need your help with her so she can live a good life. A life with both parents." "Jim said he won't." "Don't mention him to me ever again," I snapped. "Just go screw your boyfriend, Carol. But never say his name to me. I never want to see or hear about him, ever. He's a backstabbing liar, and you know it. He knew we were married, and he pursued you. He came across all friendly and nice, then he seduced you with his money and screwed you behind my back." "That's not the way it was, Mark, not at all." "That's exactly what happened," I countered angrily. "I thought he was my friend. A friend wouldn't do that. He's a cheater and a liar, and so are you." I said that a little too loud, and the cop moved closer, silently warning me to keep it civil. I noticed one of our neighbors had come out to look. Carol flinched at my remarks, but gestured to the cop that it was okay. "Please, Mark," Carol said, holding it together. "I really need your help with Jenny. She's upset. I've never seen her so hurt." "Ask the jerk to help. He's screwing you now. You're his problem." "He's not her father. You are. She needs you more than ever." You must think I'm stupid, but I guess I am pretty stupid. At least I was. I've been the stupid, clueless husband that you found it so easy to cheat on. The idiot who thought my friend actually respected me and my marriage was forever. I was an ignorant fool, Carol. So I see where you're coming from. If I were so stupid while we were married, why not now? I laughed. Then my expression hardened. But now that I've found out about you, I'm not so stupid and clueless. I know how sneaky and underhanded you both really are, how easily you lie. You must have had a great laugh about me, didn't you? You were screwing, and I was such a trusting fool. That's in the past, you witch. Now I hate you and wish you'd just disappear. First you cheat with a friend, then you break up our family. And now you need my help. What a joke! Never again! Carol stiffened, staggered by my accusations. Please, Mark. We never thought that about you. I never wanted to hurt you, and neither did Jim. But that's all in the past. We're split up now, but we still have a daughter, and we have to get along for her sake. Think of Jenny. I looked at her like she was trash. Yeah, right, I snickered. You really are something else. You cheat on me, and now you see the consequences. Not as much fun as you expected, is it? Carol flinched and let out a little sob. The cop glared at me. Let me ask you a question, my unfaithful wife, I said in a reasonable tone. How can you have a relationship with a man with no morals? She was caught off guard and stopped sniffling. What, Jim has morals? A guy that screws his best friend's wife? I chuckled. First he seduces you, then carries on a sleazy affair behind my back. Finally, he steals you away with his money, takes my daughter, and ruins my marriage. You call a guy like that moral? He's exactly the opposite. It was never like that, she protested. How can you ever trust a guy like that, Carol? I do trust him, she stammered, off balance. Really? I asked sarcastically. A guy that steals his best friend's wife and daughter? A guy that uses his money to buy your love? Carol glanced at the cop and said tentatively, He's not like that, Mark, and you know it. Yes, I do trust him. But her eyes were darting around, and I could see I struck a nerve. I don't see how, I said confidently. You know the kind of guy he is, a playboy. He has money and screws lots of women. You're just another notch in a long line of easy girls. I can't tell you how many times he's bragged to his friends at the bar about his latest conquest. You're just the latest booty call for him. By the way, have you been tested yet? Tested? She looked confused. For STDs and AIDS. He gets around and might have caught something nasty and passed it on to you. For my protection, I had to get tested right after you left me for him. You know, he's quite a player and gets lots of women. He's not like that anymore, Mark, she shot back. Sure he is. You saw him in action. Girls flock to him. He has lots of girlfriends. I wouldn't be surprised if he's getting a little on the side. Do you know where he is right now? He's at work. Sure he is. Is that what he told you? Yes, he's at work. Maybe he took the afternoon off for some girl. He works with a lot of hot girls, you know, like that one at his party. Maybe he's screwing her after work, then comes home and whispers sweet nothings in your ear. You're a little too trusting, Carol. I know he still goes out alone and probably meets plenty of sexy girls, some younger and prettier than you. You're not getting any younger, you know. He may be getting tired of you already. He likes variety. It takes lots of hot women to keep him content. Carol's eyes narrowed as I said with a laugh, Maybe he's getting some action right now. I wouldn't be surprised. You know he's done it before, don't you? You did get tested, right? Carol was getting frustrated by my insinuations. I guess she never thought about Jim's other women before now. No, I didn't. But he told me we're exclusive. He loves me, you know. Oh, right. I laughed at how naive she seemed. He tells that to a lot of women. Jim's a player, honey. You know his past. I guess he wouldn't tell you that he was screwing other women. Not yet, anyway. Her eyes showed a bit of insecurity. My accusations were hitting home. Poor Carol wasn't as confident about her relationship as she was a few moments before. You say Jenny is having trouble dealing with our divorce. How will she feel when she finds out you ruined her family for a guy that's cheating on you? That you abandoned our marriage, broke her father's heart, and messed up her life for a sleazy, lying homewrecker? That'll really help her handle her issues. Get real, you fool. That jerk isn't the ethical choir boy you think he is. Unless you think it's ethical for a guy to screw and steal his best friend's wife, remember that the next time he goes off for a so-called business trip, he doesn't mind screwing married women. Or any woman, for that matter. If he's got a stupid girl at home waiting for him, so much the better. Carol blinked and suddenly looked pale. Her eyes were nervous and darting around like she wasn't sure what to say. I kept on. I've known him for quite a while now, I said, smiling wickedly. You think he's a great guy, right? I know for a fact he cheated on his first wife, cheated on her multiple times. Why wouldn't he do that again? After all, he's not even married to you. You're just a fling, an easy piece of meat. I bet he'll hold off cheating for a while, long enough to get his new clueless, gullible girl to forget his wandering ways. Then it's back to normal. Her eyes flashed angrily. She knew what I was doing and didn't like it. He's not like that anymore, she said through tight lips. Sure, he dated a lot before we were together. He told me. He told you exactly what you wanted to hear, right? I laughed. Give the little woman a few lies to satisfy her, then go out and do what he wants. How will Jenny ever respect you after she finds out? I let that sink in, then snickered. We used to laugh about it. We'd go out drinking, and when he got a little high, he'd laugh and tell me what a stupid witch Martha was. His ex-wife. Remember her, Carol? The woman he married? He didn't respect her one bit. He screwed around on her right from the beginning of their marriage. He used to laugh at how easy it was to cheat. It was a joke. And he played around on her for years. Now he's got you, another easy bimbo to screw around on. The pattern continues. That's a lie, she spat. Jim's not like that. He loves me just like he loved Martha. Face it, Carol, you got yourself a real winner. A cheating, lying boyfriend who already screwed up one marriage. If he marries you, why not again? Carol's fists were balled up, her eyes flashing daggers. That's a lie, Mark. Jim's a decent guy, I know it. Is that right? What do you think the next time he comes home late or you find lipstick on his collar? How about a number on a piece of paper in his pocket? Or when another woman calls him? Or when he dances with some hot-looking chick at a club? Can you still trust him to be exclusive? He has a track record, and it isn't good. He's a known cheater, a proven cheater. I doubt he'll be faithful to you. If he couldn't be faithful to his wife, why should he go to the trouble to be faithful to you? I saw the cop out of the corner of my eye, openly smirking as he heard me. He knew exactly what I was doing, undercutting Carol's faith in Jim. She was caught between anger and confusion. She didn't believe I was right about Jim, but she couldn't dismiss my arguments either. Just give Jenny a call, will you? She finally spat out. She needs you now, Mark. You've got visitation this weekend. You can pick up Jenny from school Friday afternoon. Forget it. What? I said forget it. Jenny's your problem now. I'm not going to let you and that jerk mess me around with visitation canceling at the last minute, asking to move our dates around for your convenience. Just forget it. I don't trust you. I pulled a check from my pocket and handed it to her. Here's a check for the full amount of my custodial responsibilities forever. It also covers partial payment to her college fund. Now that you and your boyfriend are her parents, you deal with the consequences. I want no further contact with any of you. Carol took the check and gazed at it like it was poison. You don't mean that. I do. But Mark, listen. Goodbye, Carol. You and your cheater deserve each other. Go to hell. Have a shitty life. Don't contact me again. Tell Jenny I'm sorry. She left me too. I really thought she loved me enough. I loved her more than anything, but seeing her often would just break my heart all over again. I'm moving on from both of you traitors. And if I ever see your boyfriend again... I noticed the cop listening, so I didn't finish my threat. Carol knew how I felt. I walked into the house and slammed the door, hearing my ex-wife sputtering in frustration. Nothing about our talk had gone as she expected. My cell phone had a dozen messages on it by the end of the day. I just deleted them without listening. I went to my provider and got a new phone. I guess it was Jenny or Carol calling, but I was in too much pain to listen to anything they had to say. The next couple of days, I finished my preparations for my new lifestyle. I went to the bank, pulled my money out of my accounts, and opened a new one. There wasn't much money after the check I wrote to Carol. Then I went to a real estate agent and put my home on the market. When the sign was placed, I got out my spreader and spread weed killer over my entire yard. I knew it would soon kill all the grass and shrubs, leaving the yard bare and desolate. I bought some fish from the market, dropped them down the heating vents, and turned on the heat to let the smell of rotting fish fill the house. I was purposely ruining the house so it would sell cheap, and she wouldn't get a dime from it. Of course, neither would I, but I didn't care. I only wanted to make sure my ex-wife got nothing. The next day, I moved out what little furniture I had left and rented a tiny, cheap studio apartment. It was close to Jim's car dealership and not too far from my office. I sold my car for cash and pawned everything that reminded me of my ruined marriage. Then I threw myself into my work, making as much money as I could with overtime. My boss was happy, and I guess I was too. Working hard helped me forget about the betrayal. The real estate agent called me and said my house wouldn't sell because it had a terrible smell and the yard was a mess. Just lower the price as much as needed. Are you sure that's necessary, Mr. Covington? If we put in some grass and get rid of the awful smell, I'm sure we can get full price, he said, obviously wanting a full price to enhance his commission. No, just dump the thing. The quicker, the better. But we might have to cut the price by as much as 30%, or even more if we can't get rid of the smell. No problem, just get it sold. Cut the price in half if you have to. All right, if you're sure. The house eventually sold, but the price was so low that we barely got anything out of it. I sent Carol the sales documents and a check for $500. I know she was shocked and expected far more, but she didn't have my new number to contact me. I told her to reach out through my lawyer. He called me and said Carol was upset with the price. I just laughed. He also said Jenny was calling him almost every week. Don't you want to let her know how you are? He asked. I know you're upset with your wife, But your daughter was nearly crying when I told her I couldn't release your number. They made their choice. Now they have to live with it. It had been a few days since the house sold. So far, all my plans were working. I wasn't sure how much of my marital problems Carol's family knew, or Jim's either. So I composed an email explaining in explicit terms how my former best friend had seduced my cheating wife behind my back, how he stole her from me, broke up my family, and took my daughter. Of course, I embellished the tale quite a bit. None of the facts were wrong, but I made sure that everything was the truth. I gathered the email addresses of everyone we knew, all of Carol's family, her friends, Jim's family and friends, everyone from our church, and the club that Jim goes to on occasion. I also acquired the names of all the employees and staff at Jim's dealership and Carol's workplace too. I even found some of his customers and included them. I posted some unflattering remarks on Jim's Facebook page, his company's website, and any other person or entity I could think of that had any contact with them. I put the document I composed in an email to everyone, hit the send button, and let the truth fly. The next day, my lawyer called me upset about the emails and asked me to stop sending them. He said I could be sued for damages. I can't be sued for telling the truth, I told him, and sent him a copy of the email for him to check. He said it was truthful, but a judge might not see it that way. I did try to shelter Jenny and didn't send anything to her school, her friends, or their parents, but I knew they heard about it, and Jenny was probably embarrassed at school when she was confronted by them. I went to a printer and had a bunch of leaflets made up about how I was betrayed by Jim and my ex-wife. I didn't use my name, but they'd know who wrote it if anyone confronted them. Again, I embellished the tale and made them the most deplorable people ever. I went to Jim's dealership in the middle of the night and hung them on every tree, telephone pole, and light fixture I could find. I also went to every restaurant and put them up in the bathrooms. I knew some of their favorite places to hang out and made sure the bathrooms there had one too. I even paid some people to put them up in the ladies' rooms. In days, nearly the entire town knew the details of their sordid affair. I made sure everyone knew Jim was a salesman at his dealership and to avoid such a sleazy creep. By this time, my lawyer was fielding calls from all over. He was upset with me, so I just dropped him as my lawyer. He was pleased I did. Later, I noticed some of the signs had been taken down. I didn't care. I had more and pasted them around town, even near Jim's house, which I know pissed him off. After the divorce, I was nearly broke, but now that I was working overtime, I was making serious money. My cheap apartment cost very little, and with so few financial obligations, my net worth began to increase rapidly. My paychecks were quite large now. In a few months, I had saved quite a bit of money, and more was coming in every week. It's amazing how much money an accountant can make, working 14-hour days with nothing to spend it on. I hired a private investigator. I didn't need the expensive surveillance plan he offered. Instead, I just had him check up on Jim and Carol's schedule so I'd know where they were at any particular time of day. When I had a grip on their routines, I had enough to start on the next part of my plan. Jim Simpson was well off, but he wasn't filthy rich. With my campaign against them, the rumors about their despicable acts were now common knowledge. It must have cut into Jim's income because he sold cars, and anyone who knew was leery about buying a car from him. Car salesmen already had a bad image, and his was worse than most. As his income was squeezed, his ability to maintain an expensive lifestyle was also diminishing. Carol's work at the art gallery was also having trouble. It seems that many of the folks who used to frequent her place didn't want to deal with a cheating wife. I'm sure the wives of the men who visited the gallery didn't want their husbands interacting with a sexy divorcee with a known track record of infidelity. Carol also used to belong to a gym, which was how she managed to keep her figure. But as her and Jim's income shrank, the gym membership had to go. Jim got rid of the BMW but kept the fancy SUV. At some point, I wondered how he would manage the mortgage on his big house. I hoped that soon that would be hit as well. I did go out on occasion and meet women. It was more to just get my mind off of work than any hope of romance. Carol seemed to have killed that. I never had luck dating any of them and really didn't care. I'd get some of the women drunk and pay them to call Jim's house when I knew he wasn't home. I made it sound like a teenage prank, and it wasn't hard to get these women to go along. They'd call and ask to speak to Jim. Carol would answer and tell them he wasn't home. The girl would say something like, "Just tell him Kathy said hi," or Let him know I had a great time last week. Or if I was really evil, let him know that Mary will be ready tomorrow. A suspicious but vague insinuation. Carol would simply slam down the phone, but it was putting doubt in her mind about Jim's faithfulness. After all, neither of them were faithful, and she knew it. I also had some guys call Jim's dealership and complain about him. Some of the stories mentioned the big guy's history of cheating, how underhanded he seemed. Anything that put doubt in his boss's mind. I even had a couple of guys complain that Jim was hitting on their wives. Of course, it was all made up, but it must have done the trick because I heard that Jim was changing jobs. I used the same game against Carol. They probably figured it was me behind all this, but I know that with their histories, the seeds of doubt were planted. I spent most of my time working, and since I wasn't dating, I had free time when I wasn't in the office. I spent time online and began to learn about short-term trading in stocks and options. Most people wouldn't be interested in trading online, but I began to realize how much I could make with a little bit of knowledge. It was simple to set up an online account with a brokerage firm. They had a training page on their website that I began to study. The philosophy of short-term trading was simple, but involved risk. The online training sessions taught me how to limit the risk and maximize the rewards. I was amazed how much money could be made with so little cash to start with. Learning to use the trading techniques took some time at first, and I did lose money on some trades. But as time went on, I learned more and began to make serious money, more than I was making at my job as an accountant. In 2 months, I had quite a bit of money to play with, so I took the plunge and got into options trading, which meant I could use a small amount of cash to leverage into a large amount of profit. During my off hours, I spent a lot of time online setting up trades that would bear fruit in less than a day. A couple of months later, my account value was deep into 6 figures. One evening, after work rather late, I was drinking in a bar. I had only stopped in for a moment, so I was surprised when Jim and Carol burst into the place together and confronted me. They must have found out where I was living and had me followed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Jim yelled angrily. Everyone in the place turned to see what the commotion was about. When a big 6'2" guy is yelling, it's hard not to notice. "You asshole!" he shouted, pointing his finger at me. "I know it was you screwing me over!" Carol stood next to him, nodding and glaring at me like she wanted to hit me. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said innocently. Jim's face turned beet red. "You jerk! I should kick your butt," Carol added angrily. "It's you, isn't it? You're messing with Jim's business and my job? Damn it, Mark, you're a real jerk, you know." I just sat there smirking at them and laughed. "You two are delusional." "You're screwing up my work, you idiot," Jim shouted. "You're screwing my wife," I shot back, smiling. "I'm not your wife, you asshole," Carol screamed. "I left your sorry butt for Jim, and he's a better man than you'll ever be." Jim jumped in, yelling, "You better cut this crap out right now, or I'm going to sue your sorry butt." I acted cool as a cucumber while they were nearly out of control. They must have had someone following me to know I was here. I didn't plan this, but it was working out in my favor. I began to see how this situation could help me. "Sue me for what?" I asked Jim calmly. "I did nothing. You're crazy." "See you for all those leaflets and those nasty emails," Carol cried. "I know your ego was crushed when I left you, but you know you're a loser anyway." "Leaflets? What leaflets?" "You know, the ones insulting Jim and me." "Oh, those leaflets," I laughed. "Can't take the truth? I guess the truth hurts when you're nothing but a lying, cheating tramp, and he's an asshole." "You're a liar," Carol cried. "No, you're the lying, cheating tramp," I said with a smirk. "And he's just a backstabbing loser who can't get his own woman. He has to steal someone else's wife." "What did you say?" Jim started to say before Carol grabbed his arm and forcefully pulled him back. The big guy was pissed, more than I'd ever seen him before. I'm sure he would have hit me if she wasn't there. "You asshole," Carol told me. "You know, I lost my job. They fired me, damn it. And Jim's having trouble too. He had to change jobs, and that's not going well either. You have to cut this crap out, Mark." I laughed. I guess people don't want to be around a lying skank. Jim's face twisted with rage. He was on the verge of losing control. "You cut this crap out or you'll what?" I goaded him. "Steal my wife and my family? Oh, right. You already did that. You screwed up. Just shut your mouth, loser." Everyone around us was watching in silence. No one expected a smaller guy like me to confront such a big guy. There were smirks all around, and the manager was making his way toward us. I had to move quickly. "I mean it, Mark," Carol warned angrily. "Stop the crap or else—" I looked her in the eye and asked, "Has he started cheating on you yet, Carol? He has a history of that, you know. Just ask Martha." And that was the last word I got to say before the big guy hit me with a powerful punch to my jaw. The heavy punch drove me back to the bar, nearly knocking me out. Before anyone could react, Jim was on me, punching me with both hands. "I'll kill you!" he cried as I tried to deflect his punches. He got in 2 or 3 good ones, 2 to my face and another to my ribs. I heard something snap before the guys around us could react. By the time they pulled him off me, I was in serious pain. My nose was bloody, my ribs were hurting badly, but I smiled because it couldn't have worked out better. It took 3 guys to hold him down, and Carol was screaming and crying at the same time. Someone called the police, and they arrived within minutes. I just lay there bleeding and looking like I was in pain. I was, but I was laughing inside at how this would play out. Of course, Jim was arrested for assault. They took him away in handcuffs, with Carol sobbing as she followed him out the door. An ambulance was called for me. I knew I would be okay, but I let the medical folks take me out on a stretcher to make it look as bad as possible. I even had them take pictures of me as they attended to me. It would be fuel for my lawsuit. As you guessed, I hired the most ruthless lawyer I could find and pressed charges against Jim. Carol left me dozens of crying, sobbing messages filled with cursing. I couldn't have been happier. It took a day before Jim got out on bail, but his employment was in serious jeopardy. He was still new at his job and probably on probation. Having a big barroom brawler on the payroll and a cheater to boot wasn't good for Jim's company. After all the bad press, he was finally let go and had to find another job. He never did find work. A month or so later, Jim was tried and convicted of assault and even attempted murder. I made sure to include that charge. He served 3 months in jail only on weekends so he could still work. He had to pay a big fine and was on probation for years. Carol was crushed. Her new boyfriend now had a record, and finding a job would be even more difficult than before. My injuries healed pretty quickly. Jim had to pay for my medical bills. I also took out a restraining order against him. Another win for me. I heard later that he was selling his house. It must have been hard to keep up the payments without a full-time job. Jim found odd jobs for cash while he was searching for work. Carol got another job, but it didn't pay much. The 3 of them moved into a cheap 2-bedroom apartment to save money. He also got rid of his SUV. He purchased a couple of cheap cars to get around. Life was tough. I let things simmer for a while. I kept having women call the house when Jim was at work and Carol was home. Occasionally, some guy would call asking for her when Jim was home. I tried to have them call when Jenny was in school or out so she wasn't involved. I don't know if it was having any effect on the cheaters, but I hoped it would. My PI kept tabs on the couple's work issues for me. When Jim tried to apply for another job, I made sure his prospective employers knew exactly the kind of guy they were considering. It took him months to finally get a mechanic job at some low-class car repair shop. They hired other ex-cons, so I guess Jim's record didn't bother them. Carol was working as a waitress at a Denny's, but I'm sure she wasn't making much. By this time, I had saved up a lot of cash. I also had a nice income with all the overtime I worked. I was banking at least 10 grand a month, meaning it was time to get on with the next part of my plan. When I heard that Jim had to sell his house, I went to his old neighborhood and drove by his former home, the huge one he had before all the trouble. I was happy to see a "for sale" sign on it. Through my lawyer, I put in a low bid for the house and was stunned when they accepted my offer. Apparently, the housing market wasn't doing well, and they needed to dump the property. In a couple of weeks, we had a quick closing and I moved in. The house was beautiful. 4 bedrooms, 3 full bathrooms, a formal dining room, and a landscaped yard. I moved into the master bedroom, fully appreciating that this was where my ex-friend had seduced and fornicated with my cheating wife. It gave me a perverse sense of pleasure to know that he'd never enjoy this bedroom or the rest of this huge, lovely house again. I cashed in some stocks and began to decorate the house to make sure the result was perfect. I hired a professional interior decorator. She and I had a meeting where I expressed what I wanted. She asked about the budget, and I told her that I would be very generous but not wasteful. I wanted the place to reflect a home, not a showpiece for a magazine. I also had her use some of the photos of my old house as a template for the decor. At over 200 grand worth of furniture and decor, the woman did a great job. I also hired a landscaper and he fixed up the yard. It had been a real showpiece, but with all the problems, it was a little overgrown. In the week since the cheaters moved out, he also put in a hot tub on the deck and fixed up the patio with a brick barbecue. It looked great. After all the updating, I believe I nearly doubled the value of the home. I wasn't going to sell. Not right now. I had other plans. It had been months since I spoke to Jenny, and I missed her terribly. I was still stunned by her choosing the cheaters over me, but eventually my need to see her overwhelmed my pride. I called her cell phone one afternoon when I knew she'd be home. She couldn't contact me because my lawyer didn't give out my number. I was hoping she would still have the same number, and I was right. She probably had caller ID, and I knew my number wouldn't be recognized. I just hoped she would answer anyway. Hello? Hi, Jenny. It's me, your dad. Dad? Really? Yes, honey, I miss you so much. I'm so sorry I haven't seen you. I guess I was just too broken up about what happened. I'd love to see you again if you'll have me. I can't believe it, it's really you. Yes, Jenny, it's me, and I miss you like crazy. I miss you too. I thought you didn't want me anymore. That's not true. I know I was stupid for not seeing you. I was just too upset about the divorce. But I'm better now. I would like to have you over to my place if you're free. Maybe this weekend. Sure, I have to check with Mom. She's pretty mad at you right now. I know she is. I can't help that. But don't worry about her. I just want to see you and catch up. Maybe we can go to a concert or something. Anything you want? Okay, let me call you back. Is this your number? Yes, you can call me anytime. It's so wonderful just hearing your voice. I love you, Jenny. I heard her sob as she said, Me too, Dad. I love you. She hung up and I was on top of the world. An hour later, I got another call. You jerk, she said when I answered. Nice to hear from you too, Carol. You go months without any contact with your daughter, she snapped angrily. The poor girl has just about stopped crying every night for you, and now her cowardly father decides to show up and break her heart again. I won't break her heart, Carol. Not like you broke mine. But you're right. I want to see her. I need to see her. There was a long pause. Carol, are you still there? Yes. I want to see Jenny. How about this weekend? Is she free? Another long pause, then, I guess so. Great. What time can I pick her up? You're really a jerk, you know, Carol said. I hope you're serious. Jenny needs you, Mark. You're not going to build up her hopes, get angry, and disappear again, are you? No way. I've learned my lesson. I miss her, and I need to have her in my life. I can pick her up anytime you say. Carol, please don't make me beg. All right. How about 6 o'clock on Friday? You're not going to disappoint her again, I hope. No. 6 on Friday. I'll be there. Thanks, Carol. Okay, bye. Goodbye. I spent the week getting the house ready. Jenny was astonished when I pulled up in a black limo to pick her up. We hugged for nearly 5 minutes. Carol was watching us from the doorway with tears in her eyes. I didn't see Jim, but I could tell that Carol was surprised to see the limo. After the driver opened the door and put Jenny's suitcase in the trunk, Carol came out and squeezed my arm. You better not disappoint her, Mark. She's been looking forward to this all week long. If you upset her, I'll kill you. I wanted to say that she already did when she left me, but I didn't. Don't worry, Carol, I told her softly. Now that everything between us is sorted out, I just want to help Jenny any way I can. She gave me a long, hard look and then walked back to her tiny apartment. Jenny was squealing with excitement as we drove away. We had a wonderful weekend. Jenny was flabbergasted to find that her old residence, where she and Carol lived with Jim, was now my house. I took her to a very upscale restaurant and let her order anything she wanted. On Saturday, we went to a boy band concert. I had never heard of them, but someone from work told me about them, and I got tickets. Jenny was thrilled. She also loved the hot tub on the back deck. It made me think about getting a swimming pool installed. I had a catered barbecue party with a few friends from work. They had kids around Jenny's age, and they all got along great. I spent a lot on this weekend, but it was well worth it. By the time I took her home, my daughter was chattering away about the weekend, even making plans for the next time she came over. The weekend was a rousing success. I hadn't been so happy since before my divorce. Monday evening, I got another call from Carol. You bought Jim's house? she cried with obvious distress. You know, he took a big cut in the value of that house. He never wanted to sell, and he's really upset to find out it was you that undercut his price like that. So he thinks I cheated him? I replied, emphasizing the word cheated. Carol didn't miss the insinuation. So payback's a jerk, right? She said bitterly. Before I could respond, she continued. He wasn't forced to sell. I heard it was a distress sale, so in a way I did him a favor buying it. You're one cold-hearted jerk, Mark. I never thought you were like that. I didn't used to be, I replied. I used to be a nice, average guy, pretty trusting and naive. See what that got me? Then a couple of sleazy cheaters did me wrong and really opened my eyes. Thanks for that. After a long pause, she hung up. In the next couple of months, Jenny spent almost every weekend with me, and I couldn't have been happier. The house I bought from Jim was now mine, and with Jenny around, it really began to feel like a home. It was much larger and more luxurious than the one we had before. Unlike our old house, even though I knew what went on here, this one didn't have any bad memories for me. I just forgot about who owned it before and enjoyed the amenities. Of course, Jenny loved it. She said she kept telling her mom how much fun she had with me. Jim was spending the weekends in jail, but all week he had to listen to my daughter gushing about how I now lived in his house and how fixed up it was now. Carol could see that Jim hated hearing that and had to tell Jenny not to talk about it anymore because it upset him so much. Tough luck. It was a couple of months later when I picked Jenny up. Jim was in jail, leaving Carol by herself. Last week, Jenny asked if her mother could join us sometime, and I agreed it would be nice. When I pulled up and she ran down the stairs of her apartment, I took her bag and told Jenny to go invite her mom to have dinner with us. She was elated and ran back inside to get her. A few minutes later, Carol appeared at the doorway with a scowl. She sent Jenny to the limo to pack her suitcase and approached me on the stairway. She looked at me warily and asked, "What kind of trick are you trying to pull, Mark?" "There's no agenda, Carol," I told her honestly. "Jenny asked about having you with us sometime. I thought it might be nice, despite all the bad history between us. I know you're a good mother. You may not believe this, but I miss you." Carol flinched. My remark startled her, and she turned away for a moment. "I know you're with Jim now, I get it. But time marches on, Carol. We used to get along as a family, and Jenny and I would like to have you with us. If you're just going to be here alone all weekend, why not spend it with me and your daughter? I won't bite, I promise." She tried to hold back a smile at my remark, but wasn't entirely successful. "I don't think Jim would appreciate me going with you." "You're not going with me," I reminded her. "We'll have Jenny to chaperone, so there will be no funny business with her watching. Just a nice family meal and some pleasant conversation. No pressure, Carol, but I think you'll enjoy it." She gave me a hard stare before exhaling hard. "Oh, all right. I guess it won't hurt to just have a meal. Give me a minute." The evening turned out wonderful. Despite her betrayal, I still loved Carol. I couldn't just turn it off like a switch. She was a lousy, deceitful wife, and I knew there was no going back. At the same time, I had been a crummy father, abandoning my daughter for so long. I still thought fondly of Carol sometimes, but I could never trust her as a wife again. That didn't mean I didn't enjoy her company that night. I could tell the past few months had been hard on her. She had gained weight, her expression was rather harsh, and the fine wrinkles around her eyes and mouth seemed to have deepened a bit. But in my eyes, she was still beautiful. The most excited was Jenny, who babbled on and on about how nicely the house was fixed up. As I got dinner ready, she took her mother around the backyard and showed her all the upgrades: the refinished deck, the hot tub, the gazebo, the flower gardens. She even told her about my plans to install a swimming pool. Then she took Carol on a tour around the house. I wasn't there to witness the two of them, but when Carol returned to the kitchen, she was misty-eyed, with tears in her eyes. Maybe she was missing what she used to have before I began ruining her boyfriend's career. "You've really done a lot with this house," Carol said over dinner. "How can you afford all this on an accountant's salary?" "I don't have anyone to spend my money on." When a sympathetic look appeared on her face, I added quickly, "And I made some investments that turned out well for me. I'm glad you approve. I was hoping you'd like the decor. I wanted it to feel like a home." I looked over at our daughter, who was gobbling down a piece of prime rib. "Now it does." After dinner, we had apple pie and ice cream with our coffee. Then I took them out on the deck and put on a small fireworks demonstration with some inexpensive fireworks I picked up. It wasn't that great, but Jenny squealed with enthusiasm as they shot up, exploded, and burst into dazzling colors. For a few precious moments, it was almost like we were a family again. Unfortunately, all good things come to an end. I invited Carol to spend the night with us. I let her know that she would have her own room, and that there was nothing romantic in my offer. She politely declined, so I got her a cab and sent her home. Work kept me extremely busy for the rest of the month. I was still making money on my investments, but I kept working to keep my mind from wandering about my lack of a love life. I could have paid for escorts, but truthfully, I really didn't want meaningless sex without romance. I wanted a solid relationship with my daughter, and if I could get along with Carol, so much the better. It was Jenny's call one weeknight that shocked me. She cried, sniffling, "Dad, it's Mom. She's crying. She's in the bedroom and won't let me in." What happened? They had an argument. I think she found out Jim's cheating on her. She's a mess, Dad. Can you come over? So my prediction came true. The sleazy scumbag's true colors finally came out. Where is he right now? They had a big argument in the bedroom, Jenny said, her voice cracking. I was so scared. Mom was screaming at him. There was lots of banging. Afterward, he came out and slammed the door hard. He was cursing as he left the house. I think he drove away. I'm so scared, Dad. Just stay there, Jenny. I'll be right over. I called the police and reported a possible domestic issue. They met me at Carol's apartment and we knocked on the door. My ex-wife answered after a long time looking terrible. Jenny ran out and into my arms. I hugged her tight as she sobbed into my chest. Thank you for coming, Dad, she gushed. I'm so scared. Carol went to the kitchen and sat down as the police officer questioned her. I looked for any signs of abuse. She didn't admit to any, and I didn't see any visible bruises. But that didn't mean he didn't hurt her. I asked the officer if I could have a word with her alone, and he agreed. Carol, I said softly, are you in any danger? Would you like to come over to my house for a while? Just until things cool off? Oh, Mark, I don't know what to say, she blubbered. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. You can sleep in the extra bedroom. Jenny will be there too. We can take care of you there. I care about you, Carol, and Jenny loves you. I don't want to leave you here with him. You and I had issues, but just forget about that. I want you to be safe. Please come with us. Jenny and I are begging you. Okay, she whispered so softly I could barely hear her. Thank you, Carol, I said with feeling. Don't worry about anything. Let's get some things packed for you. If you forget something, we can buy it. She sobbed a little, then whispered, Thank you, Mark. The police had to write up a report, but since Carol said there was no abuse, Jim didn't have to come in for questioning. Lucky for him, there wasn't. He's still on probation for the assault on me and would have been back in jail if there were more trouble. Over the next few weeks, Carol basically moved back in with me. She was crushed by her boyfriend's treachery and broke off her relationship with him. We talked about it one time. She said he was involved with the receptionist at the car repair shop where he worked. It sounded typical of that jerk. He never could keep his lust in check. Over the next few weeks, I did everything I could to provide a safe, loving environment for Jenny, and for Carol too. I know she appreciated it, and Jenny couldn't have been happier. She loved having both parents home every night. Her attitude improved, her performance at school got better, and her social life picked up too. We ate dinner together and watched movies sometimes. I loved it when Carol would cook for us. Having a delicious dinner waiting for me was great. It made me leave work on time whenever I could. There wasn't any physical contact between Carol and me. She was still distressed about her situation, and she knew how I felt when she let me down. From the start, I made it clear that we were just friends, but I wanted her safe, and having her there with Jenny and me made it seem like a real home again. I found her a job with a client of mine. Later, we found her an apartment nearby. Most of the money she got from our divorce was spent on bills and Jim's legal expenses. She did have some furniture that she got out of Jim's apartment, but it wasn't enough. I gave her a coffee maker for a housewarming present. Jenny was sad she was leaving, and Carol said she'd miss us a lot. But it was time for her to be on her own. Living with me would only stir up unpleasant memories for both of us. She needed to start fresh. She soon started dating. The guy she's dating seems pretty cool. Jenny said he spoke nicely to her and she liked him. I guess that's as good a reference as I could hope for. As Carol pulled away from me, Jenny and I grew closer. I think I depend on her as much as she does on me. I watched her grow from a little girl to a sweet adolescent into an intelligent, responsible young lady. She's taking advanced courses at school, and we started the process to find a college for her. Her grades are doing well, and several universities are interested in her. She's a wonderful daughter. I couldn't ask for better, and I'm incredibly proud of her. My love life isn't very active, but there are some women who have shown interest in an aging accountant. I have them over sometimes so Jenny can give me her opinion. So far, none have turned into a solid romance, but I'm still hopeful there's someone out there for me. Only time will tell. In the meantime, I'm busy and successful in my work, and I'm enjoying raising Jenny for the short time we have before she leaves for school. I have to say, things turned out better than I thought they would a few years ago. Divorce sucks, but life goes on. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.